All right. So once again, thank you and welcome everyone to our Microplastic Pollution Strategy Workshop number 2. I'm Dustin Bilheimer with the Department of Ecology, and this workshop is co-hosted by Heidi Siegelbaum with the Washington Stormwater Center. Both of us are on the Stormwater Strategic Initiative Lead team, and we're joined by some other colleagues on our team today as well. Emily McCartan, Chanel Holbrook, and Amy Waterman. Um, what I want to start off by talking about who we are before we get into the details here. So the Stormwater Strategic Initiative is charged with leading the operationalization of the toxics in fish and marine water quality and freshwater quality implementation strategies. We're focused on Puget Sound specifically, and we value a big tent approach for the planning, visioning, coordination, and connection of actions with partners like you for Puget Sound recovery. Regional input from conversations like this are used to inform our strategic investment of federal EPA geographic program funds. I'm also known as NEP funds around here. And we use those for innovative projects that help get off the ground projects that catalyze future actions, projects that remove barriers to solutions we need now. And so, just want to this is all kind of towards what do we uh, need to fund in the future here. And our team, the Stormwater Strategic Initiative, is a collaboration between the State Departments of Ecology, Commerce, and Washington State University's Stormwater Center in Puyallup. I lead the toxics in fish strategies that are shown here in this slide. And the microplastic pollution strategy we're developing will be added to these others when we're finished with this process early next year. You may also see reference to toxics in aquatic life, or TL, in our documents. This is the Puget Sound vital sign that the toxics in fish strategies are meant to improve, and we often just use TIF and TL interchangeably. We're very lucky to have some excellent speakers today as we begin to talk about actions that we're currently doing to address plastics big and small, both in Washington State and in some of our other states here too. There's also going to be discussion opportunities this morning and this afternoon to capture your ideas and input. Next, I'm going to turn over the mic to Heidi for a short pep talk about our human health integration goals for this workshop.
Thank
Heidi?
you, Justin. Good morning, everybody. So we have an indicator that in the parlance we call a vital sign that was developed in 2015 for human well-being. And at that time, we were looking primarily at air quality, drinking water, and risks from human consumption of seafood. And over a period of 5 years, as part of our role in the Puget Sound Ecosystem Monitoring Program, a group of us started to urge more human health integration into our work. In addition, as part of our integrated land and water planning strategies, we were learning about integration strategies in general and also taking a page from One Health integration strategies. At the same time, progress and change was taking place at the Puget Sound Partnership, which is a state agency responsible for Puget Sound recovery. They hired a consulting team to address human health monitoring, and the science work plan, which was issued last year, was amended with scores of human health interventions and references. Integration work has its challenges because we're all siloed due to the way we are trained, organize, research, and learn as professional networks. Next slide, please. And so if you have a moment to look at this, was an excellent article on silo busting. And I think for, all of us who work in larger organizations, it is definitely worth a read. Next slide, please. So, in terms of pathway, this slide shows some practical steps that can be taken towards integration. The image on the left, although geared towards students, does an excellent job of illustrating the lift that integration provides. This includes better decision making, faster outcome achievement, fostering empathy and respect for other ways of understanding and addressing the issue under consideration, and simply better context making. And to end this illustration, next slide, please. We use this AI generated image that, oh, whoops, one back, Dustin,
Oh, there we
sorry.
go. Sorry about that.
That's okay. That we use this image with our first integration meeting a couple of summers ago, where we gathered tire wear particle toxicologists, human health, and solid waste practitioners. And using this mural board and an accompanying survey, we delved more into the motivations as well as the challenges of integration. We have actually a really good write-up if anyone's interested. And we've come a long way since then, convening at least 5 workshops and now looking at a more formalized human health integration body of work that is being run by the science program at the partnership. Thank you, Dustin.
You're welcome. All right. So what we're looking for from all of you today is to reflect on and envision really what you might need to integrate microplastics into your work, whether you've thought about it already or are just beginning to. A lot of our discussions today are going to be brainstorming sessions. So we're really looking to have discussions about how we could strengthen or improve on the things that we're already doing. And those things we're going to be talking about today, and there are things that are in the intervention table that we'll talk about as well. So to set the stage for our first panel of speakers today, I'm going to just kind of go over some of this context. So why microplastics and why now? First, emerging science and research on the health impacts and toxicity of microplastics is raising concerns among scientists and researchers, and the amounts of plastics produced and the microplastic leakage to the environment is ever increasing. And often, microplastic effects are compounded by other contaminants of emerging concern, or CECs, that are absorbed to microplastic particles and can enhance their toxic potency. Microplastics are also at the center of the Venn diagram that includes toxics in aquatic species and fish and shellfish, toxics in people, and toxics in consumer products. And holistic approaches to improving health outcomes must consider all 3 of these things, really. And so I want us to be hopeful and optimistic about what we can do and the meaningful things that we can do to reduce microplastic pollution. So it's important to recognize and understand the good work already in progress, including everything you'll hear about today. Our first workshop in December focused on the driving forces, sources of microplastics, pathways for them to get into the environment, and the fate of microplastics in the environment and the air, water, and soil, as well as the health impacts on aquatic species, the environment, and people, which is the focus of ongoing ecotoxicological and epidemiological research. Today, we're going to hear about and discuss different intervention actions that can address these different factors. So we've grouped potential actions into 3 main intervention categories that you see on the left-hand table here. I'm trying to keep a similar kind of color scheme for these to make tracking that easier. We're going to talk about the first 2 of these categories today. And one of our goals for this microplastic strategy is to identify actions that we should invest in over the next 4 to 6 years. So we're going to be thinking about and talking about different kinds of actions that could be potential avenues for us to consider, including research and monitoring, policy development, pilot programs, guidance and tool development, innovation, partnerships, and collaboration. So we'll talk about the things that we're already doing and identify and help actions to help fill in gaps where there's no current actions taking place. So at each phase in the plastics life cycle, from the production of plastics to shipping and distribution and usage of these plastic products, there's plastic waste being produced, and there's opportunity for what I'm calling environmental leakage of microplastics into our uh, rivers and streams, into the air we breathe, the food we eat, and onto agricultural soils where microplastics make their way into the bodies of marine and terrestrial organisms, as well as human beings and our children, who are particularly vulnerable to those effects. And this isn't necessarily like an acute kind of problem, but rather a sublethal problem that can also have impacts on population dynamics, um, fecundity, mortality, and long-term developmental issues as well. It's important to recognize that plastics are in just about every product, and different plastic uses are going to have different polymer types, and each are going to behave differently in the environment and have different health impacts. So it gets complicated really quickly. Um, some plastics may be really hard to get rid of because they serve important functions, like plastics in hospital and medical products. Um, while others might be like single-use plastics and packaging materials may have safer alternatives and could be easier to find ways to switch away from those. You're going to see a couple simplified iterations of our interventions table today, and we've provided more detailed versions of those on our EasyView site. Specifically, the document, the table that's on the EasyView site includes links to web pages for the current examples in each of these categories. Um, so today we're focusing on prevention and waste reduction this morning. And this afternoon, we're going to focus on source control and cleanup interventions. These are draft categorization frameworks, and we're using them to really organize our ideas for strategic actions to reduce microplastics. And one important assumption that I just want to state before we get started is that the actions to reduce big plastics, things around that you're going to hear today, are also going to help us reduce the small, micro, and nanoplastics. Although we don't necessarily have data on what the actual amounts are, that'll be some of the data gaps that we might talk about resolving in the future. But we do know that managing plastics better is going to help keep those out of our air, water, and soil too. Um, it's just a question of how much. So we invite you to learn from today's presentations. Bring your perspectives, ideas, and needs to our discussion breakout groups where we're going to talk about these questions in particular. And you're going to help us focus our strategy to improve or build on current actions and resolve data gaps and barriers that can lead to quick and early wins over the next 4 to 6 years. Um, and I want to stress, this strategy is not a substitute for regulatory processes or decisions. It's not a formal risk assessment. We're really kind of getting out ahead of the game and trying to figure out what we need to start working on that'll help inform those other processes, more formal processes in the future. So with that, I'll turn it over to Heidi to introduce our panel speakers this morning.
Yes.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Dustin. So we're going to start off with Kyla Kelly and from the California Ocean Protection Council, and then move on to Art Hirsch from the Michigan Microplastics Coalition. And if Kate can join us. There's apparently a power outage in New York where she is. She's from the Natural Resources Defense Council. So, Kyla, we're going to hand it over to you now.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. Let's just get my slides shared. Let's see. Excuse me for a moment while I start that up. Okay. Hold on. Okay, let's present. Can you see that okay, or is it the not yet presenting?
Not yet presenting. We're just seeing the, there you
Okay.
go.
Oh,
Perfect.
oh, sorry. Share. There we go. All good.
So, yep, looks
Okay.
great.
Awesome. Thank you for bearing with me. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kyla Kelly, and I'm the Water Quality Program Manager for the California Ocean Protection Council, or OPC. Joining us is Caitlin Kalua, OPC's Deputy Director. And today I'm going to talk about our California statewide microplastic strategy and a bit about how that came to be. But first, a little background on our agency. OPC is a cabinet level state policy body within the California Natural Resources Agency. We're non regulatory with the mission to protect California's coast and ocean through innovative research, science informed management, making strategic investments, and catalyzing actions through partnership and collaboration, both within the state and with our external partners as well. OPC's work focuses on policy and investments related to climate change, maximizing community benefits, as well as community and tribal stewardship, protecting biodiversity, and supporting a sustainable blue economy. This audience understands that plastic pollution is pervasive, persistent, and only anticipated to increase. And meanwhile, emerging research on microplastics is showing harm to aquatic organisms and humans. But I wanted to highlight that the scientific knowledge on exposure is rapidly growing, yet California specific information is limited, or at least was more limited prior to 2018 when California started taking some major actions on microplastics. So California recognized both the threat of microplastics to our state and the need to take action. To address public concerns of microplastics, the legislature passed two groundbreaking bills in 2018. The first was Senate Bill 1422, which focused on microplastics in drinking water. It recognized microplastics as an emerging contaminant that isn't regulated at the federal level and acknowledged that while research on their presence in drinking water is still limited, there is potential for health effects. So this law required the state water boards to adopt a definition of microplastics as well as adopt methods, testing requirements, and reporting regulations for microplastics in drinking water by 2021. The second bill was Senate Bill 1263, which mandated that OPC, in coordination with a range of specified state agencies, develop a statewide microplastic strategy to better understand and address microplastic contamination in the aquatic environment. This bill recognized three key points. First, although scientific research on microplastics exists, further research, especially as I mentioned, that specific to California, will complement and support continuing efforts to reduce microplastic pollution. Second, early action to prevent and reduce known impacts of microplastics to the marine environment should be pursued. And finally, the bill recognized the need for a comprehensive prioritized research plan, including the development of risk assessments for microplastics in California. So how do we get from a legislative mandate to a fully developed strategy? There are a few key studies by researchers that were foundational and other first steps OPC and our partners took to get information that really informed the strategy. So those are listed here, and I'm going to go over each one briefly on the next slides. First, research on microplastics in San Francisco Bay found some of the highest levels measured anywhere to date. This study identified stormwater as a primary pathway in which microplastics enter the bay. Wastewater also contributes, though to a lesser extent. This study also identified several major sources of plastic entering the bay. Tire and road wear particles were a predominant source, along with celluloacetate fibers from cigarette filters and synthetic fibers from textiles, many of which were found in bay sediments. This knowledge told us that stormwater is a particularly important pathway to study and to better understand, and started to identify some key sources where upstream solution to pollution prevention could be pursued. From this study, it also became clear that more research was needed, both to understand where these trends are similar or different in other regions of California, and to examine in other potential pathways of microplastics to the environment, such as aerial transport, or how other land use areas, aside from urban, such as agriculture, might impact microplastics in the environment. In developing the strategy, OPC's science advisory team was tasked with providing scientific guidance to assist the state in understanding the risks of microplastic to California aquatic life, and they released an initial risk assessment framework. This framework recognized that microplastics are pervasive, ubiquitous, and persistent in the environment, and only anticipated to increase. And the science advisory team recommended using a precautionary management approach of microplastics and emphasized that upstream pollution prevention action, given that it's difficult, if not impossible, to remove microplastics when they enter the environment. And you'll see this focus on upstream solutions reflected in the strategy. Concurrently, the State Water Resources Control Board and the Southern California Coastal Water Research Project, or SCWRP, identified preliminary risk thresholds for aquatic life that recognizes and quantifies the harm caused by the ingestion of microplastics by small organisms. These risk thresholds were actually applied for the first time to data collected in San Francisco Bay to be included in California's Federal Clean Water Act Section 303D and 305 Integrated Report in 2024, assessing the risk of microplastics and whether these waters qualify as impaired. So the final strategy was informed by this foundational work, resulting in a two-track approach that recognizes the need to take immediate action to reduce microplastic pollution, while simultaneously advancing a research strategy to enhance our understanding of microplastics statewide. The strategy was adopted in 2022 and provides a multi-year roadmap with 22 recommended early actions and 13 priorities for California to take a national and global leadership role in managing microplastic pollution. So track 1 describes early, no regrets actions. This includes pollution prevention to eliminate plastic waste at its source, pathway interventions such as stormwater and wastewater to intervene in terms of the transport of microplastics into California waters, and finally, outreach and education to inform and encourage systematic change. Track 2, Science to Inform Future Action, outlines a robust research strategy to better understand the scale and presence of microplastics, evaluate the efficacy of management actions, and inform future iterations of solutions to prevent this type of pollution. So I'll walk through a few of the recommended actions from each track of the strategy. First, we have pollution prevention at the forefront of the strategy is sorry.
Let's see if it, sorry,
No, it's
sorry,
okay.
Kayla. If anybody is unmuted, please make sure you're muted. Thank you.
Thank you. At the forefront of the strategy is the recognition that plastic pollution is pervasive but preventable through policy and other actions. And so, as one example, the statewide plastic bag ban implemented in 2016 has successfully decreased plastic in California's waters. Recent results from the Southern California Bi-Regional Monitoring Program, shown here on the left, have shown a significant decrease in the presence of plastic bags in Southern California watersheds from 2013 to 2018, likely due to the implementation of the statewide plastic bag ban. So to curb microplastic pollution, the strategy includes recommendations to reduce the production and use of plastics that break down and fragment into microplastics. And this includes comprehensive statewide source reduction, reuse, and refill goals, as seen in California's recently adopted Senate Bill 54, the Plastic Pollution Prevention and Packaging Responsibility Act. As well as the elimination of single-use plastic products that are not readily recyclable and are known to contribute to the pollution problem. The strategy also encourages working with industry to advance innovation in product materials and designs in key sectors such as single-use plastics, textiles, vehicle tires, aquaculture, fisheries, and agriculture. Next, we have pathway interventions, recognizing that improved stormwater management can intervene and prevent microplastics from entering California's inland and ocean water. The strategy recommends supporting the multiple benefits of stormwater best management practice, such as green infrastructure and low impact development, or LID, by incorporating it into appropriate permits that will allow California and local communities to manage a wide range of urban land-based pollutants, including microplastics. Compliance with existing discharge prohibitions for trash and pre-production plastics, known as NERDLs, intercepting plastic debris from high-use beaches, recreational areas, and encampments adjacent to waterways, and achieving the 2030 deadline of the State Water Resource Control Board's statewide trash provisions, which calls for zero discharge of trash to state waters by 2030. In terms of other pathways, wastewater recycling and facility upgrades are also effective in filtering out microplastics and can provide multi-benefits such as augmenting local water supplies, since reverse osmosis is known to filter microplastics out. So treatment plan upgrades were recommended action here. Finally, while the transport of microplastics in air has yet to be assessed statewide, that need was identified in the strategy. Initial studies demonstrate that the use of condenser dryers, improved filtration, or choosing to hang dry clothes in lieu of a dryer is one approach to reduce airborne microplastics. Track 2, Science to Inform Future Action, outlines a robust research strategy to better understand the scale and presence of microplastics, evaluate the efficacy of management actions, and inform future solutions to prevent microplastic pollution. Research priorities include statewide monitoring, which is critical to informing risk thresholds for potential consumption advisories, water quality impairment determinations, and informing where public investment and action may be needed. Other research priorities listed in the strategy include updated risk thresholds based on new data, studying sources and pathways to understand what sources of plastics are impacting what communities and ecosystems, and prioritizing pathways to target in areas with the highest levels of microplastics. And lastly, evaluating new solutions to ensure California as a state is effective in curbing microplastic pollution. So I mentioned that the microplastic strategy was adopted in 2022, and I wanted to talk about some of the progress OPC and other California state agencies have made towards implementing the strategy. We've partnered with California Sea Grant to fund research. I'll highlight one key result that might be of interest to this group that showed that existing low impact development best management practices for stormwater are already doing a really good job removing microplastics, even though they weren't placed for that specific purpose. Technical assistance was provided to local jurisdictions, specifically Los Angeles County, to implement new requirements for a single-use plastic ordinance. We've held 2 sector-specific workshops with the tires and textiles industry to identify potential pollution prevention strategies or solutions in these sectors, and we are working on scheduling aquaculture and fisheries workshops for later this spring. You can find those workshop reports on OPC's website if you're interested. The State Water Board continues to implement stormwater requirements for zero discharge of trash by 2030. A wastewater treatment plant removal study of microplastics has been completed, finding that primary, secondary, and tertiary treatment can remove 95, 99, and 99.9% of microplastics, respectively. We're nearly finished developing a standardized microplastics field sampling methods for 5 different matrices, including stormwater, wastewater, biological tissue, sediment, and environmental water. We're also finishing the development of a statewide plastics monitoring plan, which we just closed public comment on and intend to release soon. As I mentioned before, the legislature also enacted Senate Bill 54, the Plastic Pollution Prevention and Packaging Producer Responsibility Act. It's a bit of a tongue twister, which enacts comprehensive source reduction and recyclability and compostability requirements to reduce the sale and distribution of certain plastic materials and single-use plastics in California. And the unique part of this bill is that it puts the onus on the producers rather than just the consumers. So yeah, this is just a snapshot of what the state has been able to accomplish towards curbing and researching microplastic pollution. Yeah, and with that, thank you for listening and having us today, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Kyle. I think we're going to wait until Art and Kate are done, and then we'll take questions at that point. But if anyone does have questions, please put it in the chat. Thank you. That was a great presentation, Kyle. Thank you to you and Caitlin for that. We're going to move now on to Art Hirsch from Terralogic, his company, and the Michigan Microplastics Coalition. Art, we can't hear you if you're trying to speak.
Hi,
There
I'm
you go.
back.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Please go ahead.
Let's see, get the slideshow going here. Okay, good. Okay. So everyone can see the slide, right?
Looks great, Art. Thank you.
Okay, good. Thank you. Hi, thank you, Heidi, for the introduction, and good morning, everyone. I want to thank you and Dustin for letting me share my experiences associated with founding and directing the Michigan Microplastics Coalition and fighting microplastics pollution. Just so you know, I had no previous experience with establishing or coordinating an environmental advocacy coalition. I learned by trial and error, and many times felt like a dumb engineer starting from ground zero. So I hope many of you in the audience will find my talk of some value in your efforts to manage and address microplastic pollution in your environments. Again, my name is Art Hirsch. I'm the co-founder of the Michigan Microplastics Coalition. I live in Boulder, Colorado, and I spend my summers on the shores of Lake Michigan near a small town of Ludington, Michigan. And so this is the beach. This is my beach, and this is Lake Michigan. And this is me not in a very good mood about picking up all this plastic on the beach after my run. So you get a little bit of perspective of the amount of plastic that I normally pick up just about every day. So I'm a former environmental engineer. I had 35 years of experience. For over 20 years, my client was the Colorado Department of Transportation when I was a consultant. And I consulted in the area of stormwater and water quality management and environmental impacts. 6 years ago, I decided to shift careers and support environmental activist groups such as Riverkeeper and Climate Reality. Then in 2022, I initiated the development of the Michigan Microplastics Coalition. So here's kind of a snapshot of who I am. I'm an expert plastic collector. And by all means, here's my email address if you want to try to get in touch with me. Well, first, a little bit about the Michigan Microplastics Coalition. We're a volunteer group. We are associated with environmental individuals and organizations that are focused on promoting precautionary, and it's a very important word, precautionary, and progressive microplastics management in the Great Lakes. And so this is the where Lake Michigan meets Lake Huron at the Straits of Mackinac, and this is the iconic Mackinac Bridge. So one of the things is you can see my arrow. This is where my cottage is right here. Is right here in the Ludington area, and the Straits of Mackinac. For those of you not familiar with the Great Lakes in Michigan, is right in this area here. And I was very lucky to grow up in the state of Michigan and live on Lake Michigan. And it's just an amazing resource, not only in the world, but just for the United States and in Canada. It's amazing. It holds 20% of the fresh water on the planet. It provides drinking water for over 40 million people in Canada and the United States, billions of dollars of revenue, 60 to 80 billion dollars of revenue related to recreational and commercial activities. So it's a real economic driver for the whole area, obviously. Great Lakes encompasses 8 states, 2 Canadian provinces, 10,000 miles of shoreline. It's huge. And there's an international cooperation biannual agreement between Canada and the United States called the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement that helps try to manage water quality issues in the Great Lakes. So that's kind of a snapshot of the Great Lakes. And there are some challenges, obviously, that we have in the Great Lakes in regards to microplastics and plastics. 22 million pounds of plastic enter the Great Lakes every year. Lake Michigan is the major recipient of that plastic, around 11 million pounds of plastic yearly. And a lot of that is coming from the metropolitan areas. You can see in these yellow areas here on this graph, or in this picture, is really Chicago, Milwaukee, you get down into Detroit, Cleveland, and also into Ontario. So there's really a relationship between the high plastic loading and the high metropolitan areas. Unfortunately, the Great Lakes has the world's highest reported levels of microplastics in fish in the world. All of the high quality recreational fisheries in the Great Lakes has been impacted by microplastics in their tissues, the gills, incorporated into the body mass of the fish. Microfibers are the #1 microplastic pollutant in the Great Lakes. And one of the disturbing parts is that there's no Great Lakes microplastics monitoring and management. And this is something that I'm working very hard on with the coalition, is to get some sort of management activity going in the state of Michigan. So how does a retired engineer get involved with microplastics? Well, it all started with my golden retriever. At the beach on Lake Michigan, we run the beach every day. And so Sam and I were running the beach, and then all of a sudden I looked out at the water and I saw this plume of white material that was in the water and also coming on shore. And it looked very similar to this photograph right here in regards to this material. And it's like, I didn't know what it was, had no idea. I put it in my hand, looked at it, and I said, God, this looks like plastic, but I'm not sure what it is. So I started doing some research. Being an engineer like I am, I started investigating, researching, and finding out, yes, indeed, they are plastics. And these particular type of plastics are called nurdles, which are associated with the plastic industry. So then I tried to find out and do a little research about what's the state of Michigan doing about this? Do they know about it? Is there monitoring going on? Is there management going on? And the answer was no. So I got pissed. And so I started developing, I was determined to do something about this, and I didn't know exactly what I was going to do. So my goal really was to really start doing something about the problem. I had no initial idea about even starting a coalition. All I wanted to do was do something. And so get Michigan to do something. And so I was able to find a cohort, a co-founder of the Michigan Microplastics Coalition. Her name is Tammy Renkowski. And her and I worked together and started developing outreach and education activities with local municipalities, organizations, environmental groups, and educating them about what is associated with microplastics, the sources, pathways, the problems, impacts, and what we can start doing something. And we think that that's successful, and we still are doing that, and it's important. But we thought we needed to really make a difference in terms of the water quality and the impact of microplastics. We needed to bring it to a higher level. And so we thought, well, let's start thinking about legislation. So we conceptualized some legislation topics amongst ourselves. And we said, okay, what do we do now? Is it just the two of us? Are we able to do this by ourselves? And so we found a legislative mentor from the University of Michigan. And she basically set the pathway and said, you will kill yourself if you two are just going to try to do this yourself. You need to find partners. You need to find a legislative champion to be able to make this happen. So we were able to find the Sierra Club. We were able to find the Ecology Center out of Ann Arbor, Michigan, who had legislative connections that we really needed to have because we had none. And that was a really important step for us. So then after that, we developed draft legislation. And so we developed that draft legislation. We found a champion, and ultimately we drafted 5 legislative bills with the support of our champion in the House of Representatives in the state of Michigan. The first legislative bill was developing a research and monitoring plan. And this was really to set the foundation for a strategy plan, much that Kyla talked about in California. This is our first step, pretty much what California did. Then we developed a bill about developing a monitoring program for drinking water in the state of Michigan, eliminating microbeads in commercial and industrial materials. So those were the first 3 bills that kind of survived going through a committee. But we still wanted to do the other 2. We still plan on doing the other 2 bills eventually, modifying stormwater regulations and controlling nurdles during plastic manufacturing, and also proposed filtration of microfibers in washing machines. Again, microfiber is the #1 microplastic pollutant in the Great Lakes. So this is going to give you an idea of what some of the plastic filtration ideas that we had either internally into the machine or externally. Another accomplishment that we had was we were able to coordinate the acquisition of $2 million to Eagle. And Eagle is a state agency that's associated with water quality management in the state of Michigan. And so we were able to initiate some initial water sampling of tributaries and rivers in the state of Michigan, which was a huge, huge leap for us, and coordinating with Eagle. Also, with that $2 million, Eagle was able to start doing risk analysis for potential drinking water monitoring locations. And they were able to hire 2 microplastic employees. So these were really huge accomplishments that we were happy about. Another accomplishments that we did was we go out, I mentioned education and outreach. We were able to have about 30 outreach to 30 individuals or organizations from Trout Unlimited, Sierra Club, and we also got those presentations posted on our website here that I've got on my slide. We expanded the coalition from 2 people, Tammy and I, to about 20 organizations and about 100 members and 5 technical experts. So we're really proud of how we've been able to do this in a relatively short amount of time. We give monthly presentations, expert presentations. We've had 28 of them so far. And I'd like to think that some of our lobbying efforts to the governor were successful. She was signed a signature petition to EPA to add microplastics to the unregulated contaminant rule for drinking water monitoring. We were very happy about that. And also the governor proclaimed October 19th to the 26th as being Microplastic Awareness Week. So we're very happy about that also. And finally, we were asked by EPA to participate in nominating microplastics to be included as what they call chemicals of mutual concern in the Great Lakes. There's been bumps in the road, though. And I think one of the themes here is prepare for the political unexpected. Um, we thought we had a really good opportunity when we presented our bills because both the House and the Senate were controlled by the Democrats, and we have a Democratic governor. And we thought we had a potential of at least passing one of the five bills. And so when we submitted the bills to our representative, our champion, she basically said, well, we need to bring this into what they called a legislative bureau. And what they do is they take that text and they massage it, make it look so that they can actually legislators can read it. It's legalese, so to speak. And what happened is that there was a changeover in staff, and they were asking for all these rewrites and text changes that we never anticipated. And ultimately, it stalled our bill for over 3 months. And again, it was right at the peak of a legislative session. So that was an unexpected bump in the road. And the next one, which is kind of weird, is our champion became a liability. During that summer, when we were presenting our legislation, they were having some political infighting, and she ultimately called her party toxic during a lame duck session. And a lame duck session is really kind of a prime time to be able to start really moving bills at the last moment. Well, that didn't help things in regards to trying to get our bills moved forward. And ultimately, she did not go for reelection. And so we needed to try to find new bill sponsors to keep this microplastics bills alive, which we were successful in doing, but it took a lot of effort. So another unexpected bump in the road is the coalition, and this is our fault. The coalition has a failure of effectively lobbying and educating those across the aisle, essentially the Republicans, and we're really trying to reach out, meet with them personally in their legislative offices to educate them and understand about the issues about microplastics. And this is not a bipartisan issue. Everyone wants clean water and gets affected by microplastics. So this is just a summary of some lessons learned. Understand the process of legislation, develop partnerships, find a mentor, be patient. That's the biggest problem I have is being patient and persistent. Not persistent, but patient. Lobby in person. Don't do it over the email. Don't do it over the phone. Meet them in person. Push the people that you talk to really contact their legislators, because the legislators are not going to do anything until they hear from their constituents. Get bipartisan support and work with your state agencies. So I hope this was helpful for many of you. Those of you who are starting from ground zero or are at ground zero, I hope this was helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Art. That was great. Very practical advice too, which we appreciate. So thank you. All right, next up, I'm happy to announce that Kate Donovan from the NRDC has made it through her windstorm. Kate, welcome.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm tethered to my phone, so I'm hoping we still don't have internet, but I'm hoping it remains stable.
Art, can you take your presentation off? I'm sorry, so Kate can get on. Thank you.
Trying. There we go.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Kate, for joining us despite these problems.
No worries. So I'm going to try to request to share.
Yeah, you should just be able to share.
Okay.
You need to ask. Thank you.
Here we go. Yep. Just give me a second to pull it up. Great. Hi, everyone. Sorry for the kind of delay getting started. My name is Kate Donovan. I'm a senior attorney and also the Northeast Regional Director for Environmental Health at the Natural Resources Defense Council. I'm based actually up in Albany, New York. I work out of the city a little bit, New York City every once in a while. But I am our kind of Albany, New York guru, if you will, spending a lot of time at the Capitol and also been working on, sorry, can you hear that background noise? I have okay, good. I have someone doing construction upstairs, of course, there's all these things happening at once. I have spent the last 6 years trying to get New York State. This goes to your point on being patient, on getting the state to pass a comprehensive bill on plastics reduction. So I probably don't need to go through these intro slides that I have as part of my presentation because I've given this presentation elsewhere about the problem with plastic. We think everyone on this call is well aware of all the problems with plastic in terms of its impact on the environment. But of course, as if anyone has seen the new release of this week of the plastic detox, the incredibly increasing concerns about how plastic is playing a role in our bodies and our fertility. And then when we talk about, I kind of start with food packaging because, single-use plastic is one of the biggest problems. Globally, it's expected to triple. Even in New York State, about 40% of our plastic is from single-use plastic materials used for food packaging, which is incredibly concerning. And we all know that this ties into recycling problems. So we have like several issues and several concerns that are kind of a confluence of plastic use, recycling problems, landfills that are filling capacity. We still in New York State, and I believe in many other places around the world, incinerate these materials. So lots of concerns with the amount of trash, amount of plastic that is kind of entering our systems. And let's see, I'm trying to, it just gets me to my next point. It's like, we can't recycle our way out of this problem. And for those of you that maybe followed some of the lawsuits in California about, the misrepresentation and the misinformation about the industry saying that recycling was a complete consumer problem and really shifting the blame on consumers. And we are now aware, that was a lie and we cannot recycle ourselves out of the problem. And so in New York State, we have been very focused on reductions of plastic as the kind of the first step of really addressing the plastic pollution crisis. Of course, the legislation I'm going to talk about is about plastic packaging in general, but we all know that all these types of plastics ultimately end up as plastics, as microplastics or nanoplastics in our environment and our bodies. So the legislative program that I'm going to be talking about is a little bit different than what Art explained, which was very specific legislative proposals to tackle microplastic pollution, where the legislation we've been really focused on in New York is as an upstream solution, getting at the reductions of plastic in the first place. Just some information about recycling. I mean, you folks probably already realize this, 5 to 6% of our post-consumer plastic is actually recycled. We have a lot of hurdles on what is actually recyclable. There are so many additives and things that are included in our recycling that make it difficult to recycle. We all know a lot about the soft film and film plastics, which aren't recyclable. So a lot of issues are tied into what actually can be recycled in the waste stream. So in New York, so there's kind of talking about like what is in plastic, which is concerning on many levels. So there are a lot of toxic chemicals and additives that are added to plastic, in particularly food packaging, because all of these different chemicals provide different qualities to the plastic, whether it be color or flexibility or resistance to breaking down or protection against UV light. It's endless, the number of chemicals. A recent report that I cited here talks about 16,000 plus toxic chemicals or additives being found in plastics. And many of these plastic additives we know a lot about: phthalates, bisphenol A, vinyl chloride. These are all really what we say the worst of the worst chemicals that are finding their way into plastics, which we know then are breaking down into micro nanoplastics ending up in our bodies. So a real terrible kind of combination of a toxic soup. Um, and like another issue with the toxics, in addition to, of course, not wanting to fill our bodies with these micro nanoplastics with these chemicals attached, is that they also pose significant harms to the individuals and workers in these facilities who are breaking down these plastics and kind of in that environment constantly, where they're having a much higher exposure to ingestion and inhalation of the microparticles. Um, and of course, we've also learned about, things about leaching of these plastics into food, especially I think we all are aware not to microwave plastic, um, any food in plastic in the microwave and heating up things that contain a lot of oil. You want to avoid putting in plastics in specifically because these toxics that are added to it can leach into our food, another pathway for exposure. So as I kind of highlighted, those were a little bit of an intro slides, but the policy that New York has been really focused on, as I mentioned, for the last 6 or so years, is extended producer responsibility, or EPR, which you may have heard. Now, fundamentally in itself, EPR is not a plastics pollution policy, wasn't historically, I should say it this way, was not historically considered a plastics pollution prevention tool, I guess, model. And over the last couple years, there has been more of a shift to look at an EPR type of policy as a helpful part of the toolbox and solution for addressing reductions in plastics. EPR is a policy approach that assigns the responsibility to the producers at the end of the life management. We see these programs commonly for single use, or sorry, for products like think mattresses or carpets, electronics, batteries, paint, kind of a single category of product, if you will. And they've often historically been talked about as like a take back program. And who knows best how to deal with a product at the end of its life than, say, the one person who produced it. Now, when you talk about packaging, it gets a lot more complicated and it's a lot broader, right? Because there are thousands of people who produce different types, thousands of producers of packaging, and it becomes a more complicated scheme to implement and to navigate. But it's not that it hasn't been done. Europe and Canada have actually been using an EPR type program to manage packaging and solid waste for many, many years. And effectively, it's a pretty complicated model of where broken down is that the producer of packaging. So I produce a cereal box, and depending on what my cereal box is made out of, how big it is, and the burden it poses to the recycling infrastructure, I would pay a percentage or a fee into a larger pot. And the idea is that every producer of every type of packaging, whether it be plastic, metal, glass, paper, cardboard, would pay into a collective system that would then go to reimburse local municipalities for their recycling costs. Now, that's kind of a traditional model of what EPR would do. It's more of a shifting of money and financial responsibility from the producers of a package to a municipality to help pay for your recycling programs. Over the years, I would say over the last 4 or 5 years, there, there has been this movement, which has been great, to use this model and to shift the narrative and the policy solutions for plastic in particular in terms of reductions. When EPR was initially kind of conceived, it often used something called an eco-modulated fee, which is something that is a fee that moves around based on how environmentally friendly your packaging would be. And the theory is that if I have less packaging, more recyclable packaging, more sustainable packaging, theoretically that would pose less of an impact on the municipal recyclers, and therefore I'd pay less into the system. Now, what we've seen is that those eco-modulated fees by themselves don't do enough to actually reduce the amount of plastic and waste that's coming into the stream. So that's kind of where New York steps in. We have been working for many years on a kind of a traditional EPR program, but we call it EPR Plus because we've added these extra components to it to ensure that it will result in meaningful reductions in plastic and other materials. So in New York, this is called the Packaging Reduction Recycling Infrastructure Act, or PREA. As I've mentioned, we've been working on this legislation for years now. Beyond Plastic is an organization that's based in here in New York that we work closely with at NREC. They have done a fantastic job at building a grassroots movement over plastics reduction, just generally, but built a movement to support this PREA legislation as the solution in New York, or one of the solutions. So what does PREA do? So as I kind of mentioned, it holds producers of packaging responsible, financially responsible. So that's kind of the classic EPR model, which says if you produce this type of packaging, you're going to pay something into the system. Now, a note is one thing that PREA does is if you develop a reusable package or a refillable package, guess what? You don't pay into the system because you're not sending material to municipalities for recycling. So there is an incentive that if you actually can shift to something that's reusable or recyclable, you will not have a financial responsibility for the end of the life management of your packaging product. And there are some things built into the legislation to help kind of incentivize the refill and reuse infrastructure in New York State, which is it's almost non-existent, unfortunately, and probably in a lot of places too. That's a challenging area. The other thing that PREA does, which is, I think, sets it apart from other EPR programs in the US, is that it mandates a very strong waste and plastics reduction target. So in the legislation, it says they have to reduce by this much, where other EPR programs would have left that reduction up to the producers themselves and not set a statutory reduction target. So our New York legislation has that. It puts investments into improving municipal recycling programs and refill infrastructure, as I mentioned. It bans the worst toxic chemicals in plastics, as I mentioned before. And it also promotes investment in traditional, quote unquote, mechanical recycling infrastructure rather than so-called chemical recycling, which we view as a false solution. And I have a couple slides that goes a little bit deeper on each of one of these points. So the reduction targets in New York particular, our bill at the moment is a 30% reduction of packaging materials within 12 years with incremental milestones, and up to a 75% recycling rate with the remaining packaging by 2050. It should also be noted that since we've been working on this policy for 5 years, these are not where we started, right? We've had several amendments. We've negotiated different points downward. Of course, we started at a 50% reduction packaging rate over 10 years. This is where we are now. I'll kind of get to like where we are in the legislative process at the end, but this is kind of where the legislation stands at the moment. These reductions are, and then some of these other points, these kind of happen through negotiations and different amendments. So now if you produce it, you also are allowed to reduce the amount of packaging across your company products. So for a good example is Kraft was, a lot of these producers are big opponents to our bill, and I'll get to this too, but New York has seen DC level lobbying dollars to fight this, like way more money than we've ever seen in New York being input into fighting this piece of legislation. So one of the things about the reduction targets is that they, if you're a Kraft and you make Lunchables and you also make Kraft single slices of cheese wrapped in plastic and then something else, you can reduce the 30% reduction can come across all of your products. So you don't have to reduce 30% in the Lunchable package, for instance. That was definitely a concession that was made at one point in time. So it provides more flexibility to the brands of how they're going to meet the reductions. Another kind of adjustment, I suppose, that was kind of given to industry in some ways a couple years back was there was a lot of, you could say that there are quite a lot of companies that have done a lot to reduce their packaging over a period of time and just ultimately don't know how to reduce or make it any better. And so there are provisions that allow a look back period to kind of prove that within the last 12 years, they have actually done steps to make those reductions possible. Recyclability criteria. Another thing the New York bill does is tries to kind of standardize recycling in the state. And that's also really important for reducing plastics because we know that there's so much confusion on what can be recycled and what can't be recycled, and people just throwing everything in the recycling bin, which oftentimes is not even that helpful because we're just throwing a lot of things that can't be recycled into that infrastructure. So the recyclability criteria in this bill would have some kind of consistency framework. So it has to be able to be recyclable in the state by a certain amount. Consistent regional markets that would buy the material, because that's an important part of recycling, is you need someone to buy the material. And then adding in some elements that are part of the plastic pack, which tries to address these problematic plastics, in particular, opaque or pigmented plastics cause concern for the recycling infrastructure, in addition to being chemicals that are added for those colorants. Other, different rigid plastics, label construction. So a lot of the inks or adhesives that are used on plastic packaging or all types of packaging can pose problems for the recycling, as well as polystyrene. So those are recyclability requirements. The other piece that's really important in New York is this is a list of the chemicals that are actually banned in plastics in New York. Orthophthalates, bisphenols, PFAS, heavy metals, benzophonine, formaldehyde, polyvinyl chloride, polystyrene. These are what we would say are the worst of the worst. Of course, we know there are thousands more, but we would argue these are the biggest and most important ones to address at the moment. And I guess that's kind of the end, but I think what I might say about, I was going to wrap up, I don't think I have the slide here about where we are in the legislative process in New York. We have, as I mentioned, this bill has been introduced for over 5 years now. It's gone through several iterations. What I've presented today is kind of where we are today. It has passed our New York Senate 2 years in a row. It has not been brought up for a vote in the Assembly as of yet. We are in the middle of our New York legislative session at the moment. Our sessions run from January through June. And we are kind of all part of a very large coalition in New York, really working to secure the passage of this particular bill this year. We have a lot of things that are headwinds, I guess. It's an election year in New York State for the governor. It's a gubernatorial year, which makes things a bit challenging, as well as affordability. As you all know, that is a big kind of barrier to, I would say, just environmental policy in general in New York and probably other places, is the perceived increase in costs that this type of regulatory framework would result in, even though we know that's not true, and we have lots of examples of it that doesn't become realized. It is certainly an important piece of the puzzle that plays into the minds of the legislature when they're bringing these type of policies up for a vote. So we've kind of had to combat that. And even as of today, there is a new set of amendments that have kind of been proposed to help not bring industry along, because there's never an appetite in New York. We have a fully Democratic Senate, Assembly, and governor, but a couple more amendments that have been proposed to at least probably quiet down some of the opposition. There will always be opposition to this, but if we can convey to members that we have made some of the compromises that industry wants, which we have, that may help reduce some of the opposition and allow it to go through an assembly vote. I think that's it. I don't think I needed the full amount of time, but I'm happy to answer any questions at the end.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Kate. I think what I'm going to do is there are a lot of questions that were in the chat, so maybe I'll just take them as I see them, if that's okay. So there were a lot of questions about what was happening in California, and Kyla and Caitlin also put a lot of links in the chat, and we will collect all that information for you if you don't want to cut and paste it yourself, and we will share it after today. But there was a question about whether California OPC had a task force on microplastics with different state agencies like Cal Recycle. They were curious about California's process for coordinating efforts and working together across mediums like water, air, and land. So either Caitlin or Kyla can answer that if they could.
Yeah, of course. I read in the chat a little more context in that our council directed OPC staff to facilitate an interagency plastic pollution steering committee. And so this is primarily an information sharing body across state agencies, not only limited to our home agency, the Natural Resources Agency, but to the California Environmental Protection Agency, which is a complementary sister agency with its own boards and departments and offices, as well as others such as the Department of Transportation, our Caltrans, among others. Any entity that may have an opportunity for additional coordination. Again, it's mostly information sharing of what new efforts are taking place. Senate Bill 1263 that was adopted in 2018 that directed OPC to create the statewide microplastic strategy, essentially directed us to coordinate with many of these entities and state agencies that are already part of this steering committee and this existing body within the state. And so that allowed us to work pretty efficiently as far as identifying priority actions, priority information needs by our sister agencies. And it allows us to then target our research. For example, the research related to low impact development and green infrastructure for stormwater. We actively formed a research solicitation, a request for proposals in a partnership with the State Water Resources Control Board and other regulatory entities that would actually require, certain types of infrastructure within stormwater permits and the information they needed to actually do that. So that's the existing body for us. Of course, then we then have active, very topic specific working groups. I think, stormwater and green infrastructure is one great example that was a smaller cohort of those with programs that directly were impacted by that type of question. And then of course, monitoring is a larger, pretty robust interagency effort as far as identifying what existing programs exist, what are the gaps and the needs. There are, for example, special studies taking place, certainly within San Francisco Bay was one special study, but also by our Air Resources Board has active special studies more primarily related to vehicle tire wear as one example. So again, it's an opportunity for us to identify what is taking place, where are the gaps, how can we advance and fill those gaps, especially as funding comes online to support this work in California.
Great. Thank you so much. There was also a question about the toxicity thresholds in the water quality assessment in California. And then Kyla, I think, had responded to that.
Yeah, it was used, as I said, applied to the data collected from the San Francisco Bay and used in the integrated report, which is the part of the Clean Water Act and the way to list water bodies as impaired or not. And so the integrated report applied these thresholds, and I think the outcome was that more research is needed to be done to make a definitive listing or not.
Okay, thank you. There's also a question about whether you had research or recommendations for soil medium replacement at GSI installations, since the detention soils have to be removed every 8 to 10 years.
Yeah, the research done on microplastics in best management practices didn't look at BMP maintenance quite yet. That is something that SCORP, the Southern California Water Research Project, of which OPC is a member agency, is interested in looking at in the future. As there's open questions about are microplastics going to clog these systems, and what are the optimal medium? But it's interesting to hear about the 8 to 10 year finding from whoever put that in the chat.
Okay, thank you. And then there was a question about cigarette and clothing microplastics in the stormwater, since that was your biggest conveyance source. And there was also a related question about whether the research is attempting to distinguish between the two, because cigarette filters and most clothes are made from different polymers. This came from you, Kyla. So advanced analytics like FTIR or Raman spectroscopy can distinguish them. Do you want to speak to that just a bit?
Yeah, there's been a lot of advances in this research area recently with analytic techniques and what it's able to do. And FTIR and Raman are two major ones, and I believe there's others. The challenging thing about these methods is that they're very expensive to run and very time intensive. So a lot of our researchers have expressed these concerns with it just taking a long time to finish samples and get that information. But there are others in this space working on potential automation of this technique so it can be run quicker, more efficiently. And so, when determining what studies we want to do or others want to do, it's really a balancing act of, okay, do we need to know the polymer specific information? Are we interested in the sources, or are we really just interested in how much microplastics is in this area? And that depends on what you want to get at and what kind of information you're seeking.
Okay, thank you. Caitlin, did you want to weigh in because you just came on camera?
No, my camera finally allowed me to come off camera.
Oh, okay, great. Nice to see you. Okay, let's see. There is a question for Kate about what is recyclable in the current bill.
Well, I think Kay already answered it, so it's okay.
Well, that's okay. I mean,
Okay.
Kate, why don't you just speak to it? Because I'm trying, because not everybody's in the chat.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, I put it up on one of my slides, and I'm happy to share the slides after. So we kind of tried to establish some criteria. Our Department of Environment would have a role in forming like the actual list, but we looked at, what type of materials is there an end market for? What percentage in the state is it already being recycled? And then we looked specifically at the plastic pack, which is something that companies have already voluntarily agreed to address. And that's a number of kind of elements that make recycling plastic problematic. And that would be like the colorants, the adhesives, PFAS, and some other things.
Okay, thank you, Kate. And then Eleanor had a question about how the legislation handles the issue that packaging is often purchased by the manufacturers of the products that are ultimately marketed. So is it the responsibility solely on producing packaging, or is there some responsibility for entities that actually market products in single-use plastic packaging? So who's like subject to the law?
Yeah, so we have there's a kind of a tiered level of producer in the New York state law. I don't have the language in front of me, but I mean, ultimately, it could be multiple different parts of the cycle depending on who has control over kind of the product. But ultimately, so the other thing is you have people who produce packaging and then the brands that buy the particular packaging, right? So they're linked. It's not, there is the responsibility that falls on the brands that purchase the packaging as well.
Okay, thank you for that. And then Heather, do you want to come off mute and talk a little bit about the law that just passed here? Heather, is Heather still on the call?
Here, give me a sec.
Oh, there you are. Hi, Heather.
I'm actually at a ecology-sponsored or work-sponsored compost conference, and while you all were talking about microplastics here in this conference, there was discussion about microplastics in compost, and it was not a good conversation. Anyway, as in people are thinking it's okay to have microplastics in compost. So just last year in 2025, the Washington State legislature passed the Recycling Reform Act, which is our version of the New York bill that was discussed earlier, which is EPR, extended producer responsibility for packaging and paper products. It took 6 years to get it passed. It's very comprehensive. We were very, very excited about it. And it will make it so that manufacturers will be paying for the recycling. 90% of the cost of recycling in Washington State, meaning that 11 counties right now across the state, we have 39 counties right now, do not have curbside recycling collection. That will come into effect. They will get recycling. So all residents who currently get garbage pickup curbside, that's multifamily and single family, will have recycling pickup. And then there'll also be drop off for certain things. By October 1 of this year, we will have 4 draft statewide lists produced by Ecology in the draft format, which will then go through some iteration, which will probably be similar to the list that has already is on the street in Oregon and is being edited as we speak. This means that people in Seattle will be able to recycle less stuff, and people in other parts of the state will be able to recycle a lot more stuff. And so we're going to get some of that problematic stuff out of the recycling system that people think, oh, this is recyclable when it really isn't. And we're primarily talking about plastics. And then in the bill, we did not address toxic chemicals. We initially had in there, but we took it out because we have a very strong, safer program. That was a big fight to get that law passed several years ago. And through that very, very strong law, and we're the only state in the country that has it, we are able to, Ecology goes through cycles where they're looking at toxic chemicals in packaging and in products and in things like, spray on coatings for carpets and whatnot, through a large range of toxic chemicals. And some of the folks here on the call today are part of that process. And so we decided that it was not a good idea to have it in this law because we did not want to have conflicts with the SAFER program. So we as advocates, Zero Waste Washington and our partners definitely want to get the toxic chemicals out of the packaging, but we decided to do it the other route. The law, though, does have plastic reduction targets that are going to be developed. And so there is plastic reduction in there, and there's litter related stuff. It's a huge law. Happy to say a lot more about it, but very excited that it's in place and starting to be implemented.
Well, thank you for your Herculean efforts along with your other colleagues. So thank you for that. We're now going to take a break. If you could bring up the break slide. Thank you, speakers. That was very interesting. And Art, I have a lot of questions for you. So I had a lot of questions for Art about how you make that magic and sort of activate people. It's more of a communication issue as well as a collaboration issue. So congratulations on your successes in Michigan. So please come back a little bit before 10:40, maybe just like 2 seconds before 10:40. And then we're going to be going into breakout rooms that are run by Dustin, myself, Chanel, and Emily, and you'll be automatically put in there by Stephanie, our magic maker, with her son, who's adorable. Thank you for joining us. And we will see you at 10:40. So please take a break, recharge. Thank you again.
Heidi, I just resumed recording. Is that fine? Yep, okay.
Alrighty. Share my screen. There we go. Okay, thank you for having me. I appreciate the invitation to participate. So we've been hearing a lot about, microplastics and some of their sources. So I'm going to be talking about yet another source to add to our worries, I guess. Which is coming from the built environment. The building industry is the second largest user of plastic, so that's why we're looking into it and concerned with it. But hopefully ending on a positive note in terms of having some solutions. So having some solutions in particular with the affordable housing sector here in Minnesota leading the way. Okay, advance here. There we go. So I like to start my presentations with a little game here. And the game is called Guess What's Not Plastic. So this is a example of a children's healthcare waiting room. So you can see some of the materials here, the carpet, for example, a nice, bright, fun-looking carpet. That's plastic that is usually either nylon or polyethylene type plastic material with a vinyl backing, often PVC or vinyl backing. The furniture there probably has a plastic foam covered by plastic plastic fabric of some sort. The fun decals on the wall, those are vinyl. Wall coverings, even the paint on the wall is plastic material. A lot of people don't think about your latex acrylic paint, but that is a plastic binder that goes onto your wall surfaces. So maybe your glass in the windows are not paint, and maybe some of those wood furniture are not plastic, rather. So you can see where you can play this in your own space or in your own workplace and see what's not plastic in the spaces that you occupy every day. And I mentioned that we work with building materials here at Habitable because of the sheer volume of materials that they represent. And they are the second largest consumer of plastics behind packaging. And they are used at a similar scale, used and discarded at a similar scale. Some people think that plastics in buildings, well, they last a long time, but that's not always the case. So carpet, for example, is replaced in commercial settings about every 3 to 5 years. And partially as a result of this, we throw out in the US carpet that's about 2 million pounds of carpet, 2 million tons of carpet every year. And that's about the same volume of plastic as all the plastic water bottles, plastic bags, and plastic straws discarded in the US each year. And a lot of that carpet is burned or landfilled and contributes to the microplastic problem. Another sort of interesting stat is PVC manufactured for piping for water pipes, water and waste pipes. We make about 25 million tons of it every year globally. And this could reach to the moon and back 10 times. And that's just 1 year's worth of production. So huge volumes. And because this is a microplastics workshop, wanted to talk about how microplastics contribute or how building materials contribute to microplastic pollution. So we've talked about polystyrene a little bit today. There was a study out of University of Toronto. The Roachman Lab that was already referenced once did a trash study, and they picked up waste along the beaches in Toronto and showed that they were able to test those plastic materials for the brominated flame retardants that are a marker that that plastic foam came from plastic insulation. And about 60% of that plastic waste that they found on those beaches was indeed from plastic insulation. So that's either from demolitions or from installations where it's blowing off of the installation site. And there was a study also that modeled that about 18% of the microplastic leakage into our oceans and waterways is coming from architectural paint. Architectural paint is the paint that's on the exterior or interior of your buildings. So that can be getting in from a number of different ways, but largely from installation, so painting, application, as well as erosion over time. At Habitable, we're a research organization, and we dig into what building materials are made of and what are the human health and environmental considerations of those materials throughout their life cycle. So while we're talking a lot today about the end of life, we know that from some of the previous presenters that plastic pollution can happen, and the exposure to or release of hazardous chemicals can happen throughout the life cycle of these materials, from raw material extraction through manufacturing, installation, use, and end of life. That any one of those stages can use and release hazardous chemicals, and any one of those stages can use and release microplastics. At Habitable, we rank different building materials on the basis of the use and release of those hazardous chemicals. Not just on the plastic use, though that is one consideration. We look at all the hazardous chemicals used and released over the life cycle of those materials and rank them from worst in class being red to best in class being green on that basis, because we believe a product isn't healthy unless it's healthy for everyone. So we will rank product types like carpet within a product category like flooring relative to one another. The reason we do the product type approach, we don't rank specific manufacturer products. We're not a product certification. Our product guidance is freely available. So the reason we take this product type approach is because we want to point people in the right direction from the very beginning of their project. So from the modeling stages, from the very early planning stages, before they select specific manufacturer products, we want to make sure they're pointed in the right direction. So I like to use the analogy of in the grocery store. If you are in the candy aisle of the grocery store, probably anything that you pick, whether it's a organic certified coconut chocolate bar or a gummy bear, they're probably all not great from a nutrition perspective, probably anything you choose. In the meanwhile, if you're over at the veggie aisle, if you're picking up a cucumber or tomato, they're all probably going to be relatively good choices from a nutritional perspective. So that's what we're trying to do with our guidance, is point you down the right aisle of the flooring store in this example. So if you're in the vinyl section of the flooring store, you are in the wrong aisle, because even if that vinyl is orthophthalate free and it's low emissions and it's recyclable, it's still red. Those are still red products. Those are still worst in class products. So you should be taking a step back and asking, what is a healthier flooring type? So linoleum or hardwood floor or ceramic tile, those are all healthier options when you look at the life cycle release and use and release of hazardous chemicals. So that's what we're trying to do here. So this is an example of installation product guidance. And we pay attention to plastics because across all, as we were doing our research, plastics were sinking to the bottom of our guidance for all of our product categories. And not because we were picking on plastics, but because they simply use and release more hazardous chemicals throughout their life cycle. And Lead products are also in the bottom of our guidance if you look at our pipe guidance. But plastics just in general, we're kind of towards the bottom of our guidance. So um, we encourage project teams to take a step out of the red zone and choose anything orange and above, but prefer those if possible in the green and yellow zones. We have product category guidance for 18 product categories. So I'll drop a link in the chat after my talk here to the guidance, but it's linked here too on the slide, from anywhere from interior finishes like flooring, paint, to exterior finishes like exterior cladding or windows. We have guidance that points you in the right direction and gives you guidance on what product types are typically better from a material health perspective. Most of those product types are low or no plastic that are in the yellow and green zone. Most of those plastics, oh, I forgot to mention in this guidance, I also wanted to point out that most of the options in that yellow and green zone tend to be plant-based or mineral-based. So we saw this repeat itself. Plant-based materials tended to be best in class, followed closely by mineral materials, and then plastics tended to be the worst in class. I was asked to talk about our work in Minnesota. So about a year ago, we published a report looking at what materials were being used in affordable housing in Minnesota. We looked at 36 projects that represented over 2,100 units in Minnesota. And we looked at the products that were used in those affordable housing projects. Over 600 products were analyzed and binned using our red to green ranking system, our informed product guidance. And we were not surprised to see that about 70% of the products were in that red zone. So we're in that worst in class red and orange zone for those affordable housing materials that we analyzed. But what we were surprised at was when we presented this information to the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency. So that's the agency that provides the capital for these projects. They immediately took action. They implemented additional points to their project evaluation program that is built on or based on the Enterprise Green Communities system, and added up to 19 points for healthier materials. So that includes points for education. So we educated our first cohort of project teams this fall, and baselining their projects, so understanding what materials they currently use, and then selecting non-red products. So project teams are incentivized to choose healthier materials as well. So as I said, we had our first cohort, and while we don't have the results of those cohorts yet, because a selection of those just got funding, so we'll learn more in about a year. We do have information. This example is from Side by Side Architects. It's actually a project in Washington State, that affordable housing project that used Inform to do a pre-assessment in which they had about 40 to 30% of their products were in the red zone. And then they did a post-assessment. So they were able to swap out a number of materials and able to get that red guidance or the red products down to 13%. And bump up their yellow and red to over 60%. So this is a great example. We have a number of other case studies on our website as well of affordable housing projects that have been able to take that step up. What was really cool about Side by Side, they were able to stick within their price restrictions. So their budget was very tight, as all affordable housing projects are, and they were able to stick within that pricing restriction. They also published on their website the price differences and the different materials that they evaluated for this project. So that information is available online. To give you a sense of the the scale of change that's possible. I use this example for materials used in office buildings in the United States. We like our carpet, so we use a lot of it in the U.S. Most of the floor space of U.S. office buildings are carpeted, about 84% of the square footage. If we swapped just half of that carpet out for a non-plastic, safer alternative like linoleum, but you could choose wood or you could choose ceramic tile, a product that lasts longer, that has no or low plastic, that is healthier. And the other half of it with a carpet with no vinyl, you can have huge impacts. Over 50 years, the building would reduce about 130 million tons of carbon dioxide, 20 million tons of plastic waste, because we're not throwing out that carpet every 5 years, and then 4 million tons of vinyl chloride. And so you all remember that Ohio train derailment. That was just 5 cars of vinyl chloride. This is the equivalent of 45,000 train cars worth of vinyl chloride. So huge, huge impacts over the course of the building. Our goal is to shift in Minnesota from 70% to 50% over the course with this first cohort of trainees. So we will update you when we hear the progress of that project. I also wanted to share this example of a legislation that happened in New Jersey, where they were worried about a New Jersey coastal community was worried about the snow that they were finding on the beaches. That was from the cutting of plastic building materials, largely like EPS, XPS, and polystyrene insulation. And so this new legislation is under consideration where they're requiring containment procedures for construction sites. And this extends beyond just plastics and includes silica and fiberglass, but plastics were the main driver of this legislation. And it has been picked up by 17 municipal ordinances and 4 resolutions passed just last year. So we're anticipating some progress on that as well. But we also want project teams to understand that they can either use these containment practices or choose a healthier non-plastic alternative that doesn't lead to that much dust being made. So pre-manufactured hempcrete or wood fiber or cellulose insulation won't have the same sort of dust concerns as some of these other alternative materials. We just published a couple reports, Designing Out Plastics, which is a report where we identify the top uses of plastic in the built environment and the top opportunities. So we identify 4 opportunities specifically to reduce our reliance on plastics in the built environment. And our policy brief, which identifies policy opportunities from global plastics treaty negotiations to local and state policy opportunities. And the tiny URLs are there for those of you who are interested in downloading those reports. I'll land on another tool that was asked to highlight here, which is called our Pharos hazard tool. It's a tool that allows users to evaluate very quickly the hazards associated with chemicals in their products. So this could be used by and it is used by architects and designers, but it's also used by lots of other types of industries, as well as regulatory bodies. So it's a quick way to type in a chemical name or CAS number and find quickly the hazards associated with the materials. We also store all of our common product, our building material data in this Pharos database. So if you're interested in understanding, where that microplastic came from, you could use Pharos to identify potential sources of those microplastic pollution materials. So I will land on just this image of an alternative image to the first one I started with, the space is finished with natural materials. So I just want to leave you with thinking about how this space makes you feel to be surrounded by more natural plant-based materials in your space. So thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. Very interesting, and also looks very comfortable. So let's see if anybody has questions for Teresa. I did see that there was one question around whether the color scale system takes environmental factors like emissions, extraction, etc., from life cycle analysis perspectives into consideration as well, or are they focused primarily on toxicity and human animal health impacts?
Yeah, great question. We do consider we do consider environmental impacts. What we don't include in our guidance is specifically carbon emissions. So it's not a embodied carbon comparison tool. Though we do have some reports that overlay the embodied carbon with our guidance and show the opportunities to improve both. So I'll encourage you to check those out. So our guidance is based on the use and release of hazardous chemicals. So, but those are the definition of hazardous chemicals includes chemicals that are hazardous to the environment. So persistent, bioaccumulative, and toxic materials would be included in our definition of hazardous chemicals. So hopefully that answers your question.
It does. Thank you.
Yeah.
And Heather had a question about cost differential between natural materials and those that are imbued with a lot of hazardous chemicals.
Yeah, great question. So cost information is not included in our red to green guidance, but obviously incredibly important. So we developed the guidance originally with the affordable housing sector in mind. So we included affordable options in our guidance. We now have added additional options that might be a little more a little more price prohibitive, like wool insulation isn't available for everybody, right? But within our guidance, we're encouraging project teams to take a step out of the red, and orange, yellow, green options all have affordable options within them. Paint is a good example where you can step out of red with no cost implications. You just have to ask the question of your supplier to choose those safer alternatives. Insulation is another place where there's cost neutral options. One challenging place is PVC piping. Copper piping is much more expensive. So we recognize that as an opportunity for innovation for healthier materials. In addition, flooring can be challenging too, because carpet and vinyl tend to be low cost options, whereas ceramic tile is maybe about the same cost, but it costs more to install. So those upfront costs can be more. On the other hand, those materials also tend to last a lot longer. So if you are an owner of that project, you're not having to replace that material over and over again. So the life cycle costs then neutralize the overall cost of the project. Unfortunately, that's not always a consideration on the upfront material costs. But like I said, that side by side. Architect firm did publish the cost implications of some of the alternatives that they considered.
Okay. Yeah, we're definitely trapped by first cost thinking. That is problematic. And just one more question before we move on to Patrick. Excuse me, do you have materials that help people select and push for the safer choices with the contractors? I have found that it's often difficult to convince contractors to use safer products because they don't want to try new things or don't believe they're as durable or good, and they're not always easily available at the places they normally shop.
Yes, great question. I've had that same experience, trying to find someone in northern Wisconsin that provides any other insulation than spray foam is a challenge, turns out. So the best opportunity is education. So providing them with some of these links and resources, and shopping around. So identifying who might be from the beginning willing to work with you on healthier materials, and choosing a contractor who's able to do that is also an approach that has been working for me. Anyway.
So there are actually two more questions, and then we do have to move on. I'm sorry, but everybody put your questions in chat, and we'll definitely get back to all the speakers. So if we can't get to it today, we'll definitely follow up after. Somebody wanted to know what you thought about denim insulation, and then there was also a question about whether you work with the U.S. Green Building Council on these issues.
Great questions. Yes. Yeah, so denim insulation I would put in the same bucket as a cellulose insulation because it's ultimately, a plant-based, a cotton material, and would have some of the same sort of, none of these materials are perfect, but that's why they're relatively ranked against each other. So I would put that in the same bucket as our cellulose insulation, which is a good choice. There are some dedusting agents that I imagine would also be used in recycled denim insulation, but it's largely a very good choice, and avoids a lot of the life cycle concerns with some of the plastic foam insulation that we were talking about. So great question. And then USGBC, yes, we are working with USGBC. We actually piloted a credit that's an integrative design credit in their innovation section, where they encourage project teams to do this materials modeling, which is basically using Informed to benchmark their current practices and identify options to take a step out of the red zone. So it incentivizes project teams. They can get up to 2 points in the current pilot credit to use Inform to benchmark their current practices, and then another point to take a step up. So while that was in pilot credit mode, we have had a couple teams who used that pilot. So now it's moving into, I guess, a permanent credit state, but that still needs to go through the process of going through the materials technical advisory group to get
Yeah,
approved.
of course. Yeah, through the sausage. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, so thank you so much. We really
Yeah,
appreciate
thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Thanks for leaving us with a nice image too. Okay. Patrick, you are on.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Oh, good.
Welcome.
Thank you. The next question is, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can. We're good.
Okay, great. Well, I'm gonna close this little Zoom window. Pull up the right things here. Okay, great. Hi, everyone, and thank you for being here. Special thanks to Heidi and Dustin for inviting us today. And by us, I mean the Washington State Department of Ecology. My name is Patrick Mercer, and I work in the policy section of the Solid Waste Management Program. Later this afternoon, one of our waste reduction and recycling specialists, Heather Church, will be going into more details about a few of the policies I'll talk about, specifically some of the ones around our product-related laws. So be sure to come back later for that if you can. Here's a bit more about where we'll go in the next 20 minutes or so. I'm going to start with a brief preface. It's the same one you'll see at the top of the handout we provided for this workshop, which is available on the Stormwater Strategic Initiative's Easy View page. Then we'll take a tour of some of the Washington State programs and policies that try to take plastic out of the environment, reduce plastic production, and reduce plastic waste. So as we get started, one thing we want to emphasize is that right now, we don't have any regulation, funding, data, or specific legislative direction to look at microplastics. Today, I'm focusing on the policies and programs aimed at larger plastics, and I won't even talk about all of those. As we know, most microplastics come from larger products breaking down in the environment, so there may be some link between the things I'll talk about today and micro or nanoplastics. But at this point, we don't know much about that linkage. There's still a lot to know about these connections, and hopefully this talk will provide some nice fodder for folks to discuss in today's breakout sessions. So let's begin with work that aims to prevent or remove plastic from the environment. Specifically, we'll look at litter and contamination in the solid waste system. What do I mean by the solid waste system? Well, that's a good question. And for those of you that aren't as familiar, I mocked up a very simplified flowchart using my best artistic skills. Please excuse the crudeness of my drawing and allow me to walk you through the general idea of what happens for most of us. Looking at the solid waste system helps us to understand the driving forces and pressures, or the D and the P, that's in our DPSIR framework. You can see the meeting packet for more on that. So we start with waste getting created by people, including at the places we work, at home, and on the go. Hopefully, people are putting that waste into an appropriate collection bin so that it gets collected and managed properly without becoming litter. And after getting collected and aggregated, waste heads to a handling facility, although it may make a stop at a transfer station along the way. People also self-haul their own waste directly to a facility without having it picked up and collected by a service company. Solid waste handling facilities can be many different things, and I listed the general categories we think about, including landfills, recycling facilities, and organics management facilities where they make compost or sometimes biogas. I do want to acknowledge there are other specialized facilities too, like those that handle hazardous waste or construction and debris materials. But we'll leave those out of the conversation for today. It's important to know that materials can also move from one facility to another, and we'll see why in a few slides. But the main points I'd like for you to take away from this slide are, one, there's a lot of opportunity for plastic to escape from the system and become litter in the environment. And two, the importance and power of people, especially at the bin. Because if a person puts plastic in the incorrect collection bin, it can end up as contamination. And contamination for me is a very important topic in my work as an organic specialist because I work a lot on food waste. And plastic has a strong relationship with food waste because it's often associated as packaging or serviceware. So let's take a brief pit stop into my world for a second as a way to further understand how we live and work in systems that are connected. Because as we know, pretty much all of the water problems start on the land. Food waste is a focus for us in Washington and in the solid waste management program because about 40% of the material in our state's landfills is food, and it's a major generator of methane, which you probably know is a powerful greenhouse gas. Our state's organics management laws will require the most populous areas of the state to collect food waste separate from garbage by the year 2030. This will have positive impacts on greenhouse gas emissions, but what about plastics and pollution? We know that collecting food waste comes with more plastic contamination. A contaminant, by definition in our state rule, is any substance that does not occur naturally in the environment or that occurs at a higher than natural concentration. You can see the most common types of contaminants that compost facilities see on the slide. And as I said, plastic appears in a few different forms, including dog toys. Our state rule currently says that an organics management facility must reject or clean up food and yard waste that comes in with more than 5% contamination, which is assessed visually by volume. 5% has a star next to it right now because this rule is currently open and a reduced contamination limit is being proposed. We were directed to open the rule by the legislature, specifically in anticipation of the organics management law and concerns about contamination associated with food waste collection. If you are wondering, there is much more contamination in waste that comes from commercial customers, which can often be above 10%, compared to residential customers, which is often in the 2 to 3% range. So here's a real life look at what a compost facility receives. It's also an example of how waste sometimes goes from one type of handling facility to another, since the plastic that gets pulled out must eventually get taken to the landfill. In the photo on the left, you can see a pile of incoming material at one of the state's compost facilities. This pile probably exceeds that 5% contamination limit I mentioned, so it would need to be cleaned or sent to a landfill. In the middle two photos, you can see the types of material that gets removed, including a lot of plastic film. And in the last photo, you can see a much cleaner looking pile that's ready for processing into compost. On average, compost facilities in our state spend about 21% of their entire operating budget on removing contamination. So let's put a few of the ideas together and trace how a contaminant in the green bin can become environmental pollution. It starts when a person puts a plastic bag into their green bin. We'll talk about why they might do that in a second. Hopefully it stays in the truck after it's collected and taken to a compost facility. As I mentioned, compost facilities can pre-process material that has more than 5% contamination, and they do this using a number of different tools, including human hands or pickers, magnets, vacuums, and blowers. At anaerobic digestion facilities that make biogas instead of compost, they often have depackaging machines, which separate food waste still embedded in packaging. So you can think of bagged salads or sleeves of crackers. Once clean enough to process, a compost facility uses grinders, chippers, and other mixing equipment to make up their compost recipe. This also means that any remaining contamination will get chopped up too, including plastics. After processing, compost gets screened again where large pieces of visible contamination get removed. There are testing requirements in Washington that include physical contamination, but there are no tests or requirements for microplastic analysis at this time. At an anaerobic digestion facility, after the depackaging machine, they use a system of ponds, pumps, and screens to create three fractions: a gas, which they sell as renewable natural gas, solids, which we call digestate, and liquids. The liquid fractions typically go to wastewater treatment plants. Compost and digestate solids can both be land applied, and for good reason. Both add organic matter to soil, they reduce leaching to help improve fertilizer efficiency, and they prevent erosion. But this is also a direct path for chemical or physical contaminants to get into the environment and become pollution. By now, I'm sure you're all thinking, wow, what happens at the bin is really important. And it's probably worth taking a look at the reasons why contamination and littering happen. When it comes to contamination, one reason is greenwashing, which refers to the way a manufacturer or a business markets themselves or their products as environmentally friendly, usually without scientific evidence. The original example was hotels saving water from doing less laundry. It turns out they didn't save water, but they did save money. Recycling is also a common cause of contamination. So when someone puts something in the recycling bin with the idea that if you put it there, it's going to get recycled. But as I just mentioned, compost facilities spend a significant amount of money removing things that can't be composted at their site. Sometimes people put an incorrect bin in their bin out of confusion or by mistake. For example, I can put compostable products in my friend's food waste cart when I visit them in Seattle, but not here at my house in Lacey. And then unfortunately, there is some malice where people actually use their recycling or their organic carts as a second garbage can. When it comes to litter, there are a few other reasons to consider, including social behavior and social norms. There's a famous communications example of an anti-littering ad called The Crying Indian, and it was later found that the ad actually increased littering because it normalized littering as a common behavior. I also think this photo of Throwaway Living, which is an article in Time magazine from 1955, does a great job of showing how we thought about single-use and disposable plastics just a few decades ago. In addition to seeing littering as normal, people sometimes litter because there isn't a nearby container or maybe they lack access entirely. Some people don't understand the impacts of litter and others simply don't care. And of course, they had to call out unsecured loads. We estimate here in Washington that about 39% of roadside litter is from unsecured loads, not to mention the safety risks. So with all this in mind, let's start to talk about what we do about these issues here at the Department of Ecology and the Solid Waste Management Program. I mentioned we have a rulemaking underway to address contamination in organic waste and finished compost. This is tied to the state's organics management laws, which will mean more food waste getting collected. We're getting ready to release the draft rule as part of what's called the CR 102, and our economics team is working on an analysis for the proposal. We also have a suite of litter programs across the state. This includes our litter prevention campaigns and several cleanup programs with community partners and sibling state agencies. Some of the highlights include State Patrol and Traffic Safety Commission, who enforce the secure load laws, the Parks and Recreation Commission, who coordinate Coast Savers cleanup, the Department of Corrections and the Department of Natural Resources, who both operate and coordinate work crews to do cleanup for litter and illegal dump sites. The Department of Transportation, Fish and Wildlife, and our agency, Ecology, all perform cleanup operations across the state. And finally, we administer 2 litter-related grants, the RAMP Litter Cleanup Program and the Community Litter Cleanup Program. So here's a look at some of our litter programs in action and a few more highlights. In 2024, Washington State Patrol stopped 5,300 drivers about securing their loads and issued 532 tickets in the process. Ecology and our State Department of Transportation picked up 6.4 million pounds of litter in 2024, covering 19,000 miles of roadways. And just this month, we rolled out new commercials as part of our We Keep Washington Litter Free campaign to remind residents that preventing litter starts with everyday choices and keeping our state clean takes all of us. The commercials feature a marmot puppet named Kevin that plays the part of our conscience. Kevin shows up in those everyday moments to deliver a simple message. Littering is still a choice, even when no one is watching. This campaign brings those everyday moments to life and reminds us to listen to that inner voice that tells us to do the right thing. Oh, wow. Hello. Don't scroll. Okay, so that was a very brief overview of the solid waste system and some of the work we do to take plastic out of the environment. Now we'll look at policies aimed at reducing plastic production. And in general, you can sort of think about this as looking for materials or the products that have the biggest risks associated with them, and then replacing them with something safer. There we go. One highlight I want to give today is Ecology's work with the U.S. Plastics Pact, which is a collaborative group of actors from across the plastics industry. Brands, retailers, recyclers, haulers, and governments all come together to discuss relevant issues facing plastics. We at Ecology, along with the Department of Health in our state, participate in several different work streams, including composting policy and problematic and unnecessary materials. While we don't agree with every recommendation, the PACT has a number of helpful resources, like a list of problematic and unnecessary materials, and designing for circularity playbooks, which help brands and manufacturers design appropriate packaging for reuse, recycling, or composting scenarios. One of the biggest advantages in participating in these kinds of groups is staying up to date on what's happening in the industry. That way, in the event that our legislature passes plastics-related laws, we don't have to start our engagement from scratch. In addition to the litter programs I mentioned, we also contract a litter study every about 5 years. We're actually starting the next one right now. I recently heard from someone that this is their favorite ecology study. It's a research study where a consultant goes out and samples roadways and interchanges across the state, and then they collect the littered items. They count and weigh the items from each sampling location, and then they analyze the data to provide a statewide model. This includes the amounts and types of materials as well as locations. Based on the most recent study, we estimate that there is about 38 million pounds of litter accumulating in Washington each year. If you recall our collective litter pickup efforts, picked up 6.4 million pounds in 2024. So while that number seems big, it's actually a small dent in the total. If distributed evenly across the population, there are about 5 pounds of litter for every Washingtonian. The litter study is used in a few ways, including by lawmakers when they propose new legislation. It looks at littering trends over the years and helps to assess impacts of emerging policies like the product bans we'll talk about. It also looks at whether frequently littered items are subject to the state's litter tax, which funds litter pickup and prevention statewide. Some do say that the items the tax applies to needs updating. For example, construction and demolition debris is frequently littered, but often not subject to this tax. Here's some more information about litter in Washington that we get from the study. I mentioned before that unsecured loads are responsible for 38.5% of our litter, but the largest cause is actually intentional littering. You can also see that most litter in Washington occurs along roadways and in parks. Interstates specifically receive the most litter per year, and they receive what's called miscellaneous materials. The miscellaneous materials are accumulating the fastest of any material in our study at a rate of 13.7 pounds per acre per year. This is a term that we use to describe very small or unidentifiable pieces of an item. So they're things that are kind of becoming microplastics if they're not small enough already. Again, this is the fastest growing category, fastest accumulating category of material in the litter study. In 2022, the legislature passed the Plastic Product Degradability Act as part of the first organics management law. This law created labeling standards for compostable products, including the requirement for them to be certified by a third party who verifies the product performs as advertised. The law makes compostable items more clearly stand out from other single-use items with a color signal, the certification logo, and the written word compostable. The last set of policies we'll look at today are focused on reducing plastic waste by restricting or disincentivizing certain products or uses of products. And remember, if you're free to come back for the last session of the day with my colleague Heather Church, she'll be presenting more details about these laws, including what it looks like to enforce them. So let's start with some of the core principles that guide our solid waste work, which is an emphasis on waste prevention and reuse. Sometimes this is referred to as the waste hierarchy, although I know not everyone appreciates that term. Another way to think about this is that we strive for circular systems instead of linear ones, where resources are conserved instead of wasted. If you want more information on waste reduction or you want outreach materials for the policies and programs you've heard about today, you can go to our web pages with the QR codes on the screen, and I think links are also coming in the chat. Here's a few highlights of reuse and refill work in action from the last few years. Recently, we ran a Bring Your Own Cup campaign that offered a toolkit with window clings, table toppers, and other digital materials for participating coffee shops to use. There was also a pledge and a map of participating locations where customers could get a credit on their purchase when they brought in a cup. As part of the plastic bag ban, we promote BYOB, or Bring Your Own Bag, and reusable bag options. And while the Waste Not Washington School Awards were not allocated funding this year, this historically has been an award program that schools use to install refillable milk dispensers or transition to reusable trays. You can see a few examples from Whatcom, Clark, and Yakima counties on the screen. And in 2 of these examples, the school districts actually switched to reusable trays from foam options, which we know are particularly prone to becoming pollution. I mentioned the Plastic Product Degradability Act already, which creates labeling standards for compostable products. This law also bans the use of misleading terms like biodegradable, oxo-degradable, and degradable, because these terms encourage people to put plastics into their green bins, where most of the time they act as a contaminant. For the same reasons, film bags that are not compostable cannot use green, beige, or brown. As people may know, plastic bags that are thinner than 2.25 mils are banned in the state. So is bundled serviceware. And again, Heather Church will provide more insights on these in the last session of today's workshop. Just as a general note, though, there are avenues to report these products and where you find them to us at Ecology. That way we can reach out to either manufacturers or the businesses using products that aren't allowed in our state. In addition to bans, the legislature has also passed opt-in standards for certain scenarios. So this means that these products can still be available, but they cannot be provided automatically. If a business wants to make them available, a customer must request, confirm, or select them. This includes single-use serviceware used by food businesses, so things like straws, lids, stirrers, utensils, and sauce packets. And a newer law impacts many toiletries from lodging establishments. Finally, we have two laws in the state that restrict foamed plastic. One is a ban on polystyrene foam for most uses, including packing peanuts, coolers, and food service products. The other law is for overwater structures like floating docks and blocks. Foam must now be encased in reusable plastic, aluminum, concrete, or steel that has a minimum thickness of 0.15 inches. And that was it. Like I said, make sure you come back for the last presentation after our discussion session, and you can hear more about these product laws with our waste reduction and recycling specialist, Heather Church. Thanks again, Dustin and Heidi. My contact info is on the slide. I don't work directly on most of these topics, but I'm always happy to get you connected to the right person. So thanks for listening.
Thank you, Patrick, so much. That was really interesting. And I think a lot of people probably don't realize that all of our problems generate with the materials economy and our solutions too. We're going to have to skip questions for you at this time because we're a little bit over, but I would encourage everyone to put their questions in the chat and we'll work with Patrick to have those answered after today. Sorry about that, Patrick, but we'll definitely get your big brain later on. And at this point, Stephanie is going to put us into our breakout groups where we're going to work with Mural on prevention and waste reduction interventions.
Okay, so I'm going to open all rooms. You should be automatically assigned to a random room. Except for the hosts, you'll probably remain in the main room, and then the hosts, I'll let you go to the room that is named for you or whichever one you want. And
Thanks,
if you have
Stephanie.
any questions, I will stay in the main room for a little while so I can help people. Okay.
And you can go ahead and pause the recording too at this point.
Oh, yes. Okay.
And
okay. Well, welcome back from lunch. Thank you to everyone who also joined us this morning. Our next session is on source control and cleanup interventions, and we're going to start with Anya Brandon and Britta Beckler from Ocean Conservancy. Welcome. Anna Bachman from Puget Soundkeeper Alliance, and Heather Church from the Washington State Department of Ecology. So Anya and Britta, if you would like to share your screen, please go ahead and welcome.
Great. Thank you so much. I will be sharing my screen. Anya will be the first speaker. It'll be Anya, then me, then Anya. So you'll get to hear from both of us. Let me just slideshow from beginning. All right. And Anya, just let me know when you want me to go to the next slide.
Amazing. Thank you. Well, really quickly, I can introduce myself and then Britta can introduce herself. My name is Dr. Anya Brandon, and I am the Director of Plastics Policy at Ocean Conservancy. And I am based in Portland, Oregon, but grew up in Seattle, Washington.
Thanks, Anya. Dr. Britta Beckler, I am the Director of Ocean Plastics Science and Research at Ocean Conservancy, also based in the Portland, Oregon office, but grew up in Alaska.
Next slide. So just really quickly, I wanted to give an introduction to who Ocean Conservancy is. We are a 50-plus-year-old environmental nonprofit at this point, dedicated to uniting science, people, and policy to protect our ocean today and for generations to come. Ultimately working towards a healthy ocean and a thriving planet forever and for everyone. Next slide. We accomplished this by working across three kind of big pillars in the conservation space as we describe it. We work on advancing climate solutions, so thinking about how we can attack climate change. We work on protecting biodiversity, so that encompasses a lot of fisheries work, the mesopelagic, really all the wonderful wildlife that call the ocean its home. And of course, we work on ending ocean plastic pollution. So these are kind of the triple planetary crises that we think of. Just within our ending ocean plastics portfolio, so that's where Britta and I both sit, we are home to the International Coastal Cleanup, which is the largest single-day beach cleanup effort in the world. It's been just celebrated its 40th year, and we bring partners together from across the country and really across the world to clean up plastic pollution and other pollution off of our beaches and our waterways, and to also collect data on all of the pollution they are picking up, which is really impactful for both Britta and my work. We have our amazing science and research program that Britta runs, and then we also have a plastics policy program. And we can get into that a little bit more as we go along.
All right, so I'm going to take over for a couple minutes. I just got a notification that my internet is unstable, so just yell if you are no longer able to hear me. But really looking forward to talking a little bit about the science I've been engaged with as a graduate student at Portland State University, studying microplastics and microfibers, and then in my role at Ocean Conservancy, focusing on research done here in the Pacific Northwest. And my goal is just to kind of provide an overview of what we know based on the research I've done, and then pass it over to Anya to talk about source control and effective solutions for these microplastic fibers. So really quickly, I wanted to share about a study that I did for my PhD work, looking at microplastics in Pacific oysters and Pacific razor clams harvested in Oregon. As you know, the Pacific oyster is grown in Oregon and Washington in estuarine environments, and then the Pacific razor clams live in sandy beach environments. In 2016, we decided to take on this study, or I did, because obviously both of these shellfish species are very important for fisheries and aquaculture in our region. There had not been at this point any studies on microplastics in the state of Oregon. I believe there had been one or two published in Washington, but we were still getting to understand the scope and scale of the problem. And then there had also been laboratory research showing that the presence of microplastics in the environment can ultimately impact endpoints in bivalve health, including harming reproduction and growth and feeding. So I collected razor clams and oysters in 2017 at 15 sites along the Oregon coast. 9 of them were razor clam sites, 6 of them were Pacific oyster growers, and had about 140 of each species that I then brought to the laboratory and analyzed for the presence of microplastics. I also did a study up in Washington on the Pacific coast there in collaboration with the Quinault Indian group, as well as Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, to similarly study microplastics in razor clams there. These were collected a little bit after my Oregon samples in 2018. I collected 15 clams per site at these 8 sites. And an additional piece I did here was interviewing recreational razor clam harvesters at a couple of these sites, so we could ultimately ask questions about consumption and figure out microplastic exposure from consuming these species. So very quickly, here's a QR code if you're interested. This was published back in 2020, I believe. But for our results in Oregon specifically, again, this is the first ever study on microplastics in Oregon. We did find microplastics, mostly microfibers. Over 99.9% of the plastics we identified were microplastic fiber types. The concentrations in oysters were about 11 per individual and 9 per razor clam. We did see that spring collected animals contain more plastics than summer collected individuals. We didn't have a lot of analyses onto why that was necessarily, but we do have some theories, perhaps in terms of like the clothing we're laundering in different seasons, rainy season versus dry season, etc. And we did find that oysters contain significantly more microplastics than razor clams, presumably because they're located higher up in the estuary and receive stormwater runoff and wastewater before razor clams do. In Washington, this is another paper that was published in around 2020 as well. We found microplastics in razor clams from all sites. On average, we found 7 microplastics per clam. Similarly to the Oregon story, over 99% of microplastics were microplastic fibers. And we also found that removing the gut of the razor clam, also known as cleaning, which most folks do before they consume them, reduces the overall microplastic burden that humans are exposed to by 50%. Just to show you how we calculated recreational razor clam harvester exposure to microplastics from consuming razor clams. We did that survey where we asked how many meals per year folks ate that contained clams. We asked them on average how many clams per meal are they consuming, and then we multiplied that by the number of microplastics in either cleaned clams or whole clams, because some people very surprisingly reported eating razor clams whole, gut and all. And what we found, hopefully this isn't too confusing, we broke it out by demographic, but in terms of annual microplastic exposure from consuming razor clams, just this recreational group we talked to, the maximum exposure to microplastics, again, primarily microfibers, was about 6,000. If you remove gut, like I was saying, most people prior to consuming, that reduces the amount of microplastics that individuals are exposed to by roughly half, by 50%. Though, unfortunately, predators of razor clams and shellfish in the environment are not able to do that. So whatever their consumption is, they would be exposed to the full clam amount. And as we all know, these are fished and aquacultured species in the Pacific Northwest, and they wind up on our dinner plates and are very important first food in the region. Another study I wanted to just share really quickly that we have done at my time at Ocean Conservancy is ask the public in the US, including in the Pacific Northwest, about their knowledge and understanding of microplastics. This was published in 2024, but we asked a bunch of questions about knowledge and perceptions of ocean plastics and microplastics specifically. What we found is that related to just plastic or the ocean concerns generally, people are most concerned about plastic pollution, even more so than climate change, decline of sea life, etc. Plastic pollution really rose to the top. And we also asked people for this survey in 2021, have you heard of microplastics? This is a nationally representative sample. We surveyed 2,000 people, but it was managed to represent the census. Half of people had, though most folks were not terribly familiar. And there were kind of varying levels of concern related to either microplastics in the environment or about the human piece, so our daily exposure to microplastics. Oh, geez, sorry, this got a little funky. But one more study I wanted to share really quickly is one we published in 2025. We looked at microplastics in the human food system, focusing on products that were purchased in Portland, Oregon, where I'm based, we wanted to look at different protein products that are packaged and sold here in the US. We wanted to look at seafoods, terrestrial meats, and plant-based proteins as well. There's a list of the 16 different sample types we had over there. We looked at varying levels of processing from unprocessed whole fish and shrimp all the way to your like pretty heavily processed plant-based products like plant protein fish nuggets, which I didn't actually know existed. But what we found, we did find microplastics in all of the sample types we studied. We found that the most highly processed sample types contained more microplastics, primarily microfibers, than did the minimally processed samples. So when you're comparing a chicken breast versus a chicken nugget, the chicken nugget will contain more microplastics, primarily microfibers, than the chicken breast will. We found equal levels of microplastic contamination when we compared seafood versus terrestrial meats versus plant-based proteins, which is really interesting given the focus has largely been on seafoods previously, and folks just assume that seafood are the most heavily contaminated with microplastics and microfibers. We found that all three of these categories are similarly contaminated. And then we did this exposure estimate similarly as I did in Washington, where we asked people about their consumption habits for these different protein types and found that a typical US adult might consume up to 3.8 million microplastics per year from just these proteins alone. And so just to put things into perspective, we all know microplastics, microplastic fibers are a big problem. They've been found in all global environments we've studied, deepest part of the ocean, Mount Everest, etc. They've been found in all fish taxa. Microfibers are often the most abundant microplastic found in environmental samples, including in live or dead animals. And there's a study estimating that microplastic pollution may increase 50-fold by 2100. Couple more factoids before I turn it over to Anya really quickly, but right now we know that in terms of marine species, which is what Anya and I focus on pretty frequently in our roles, globally there are about 1,300 species that have been found to ingest plastics, from the big stuff down to the micro size fraction. 60% of all fish globally contain microplastics. And like I mentioned, microfibers are the most common form of microplastic that have been found inside fish, crustaceans, and bivalves. So on to Anya with bottom line and a little glimmer of hope.
Thanks, Britta. Okay, so the bottom line is we know microplastics, and particular microfibers, are just about everywhere. But the goal of this workshop series is hopefully to think through, what do we do about that? What are control and interventions that we can implement going forward? So next slide. You can go next as well. So we're going to focus in on these synthetic textiles in particular, which, as Britta mentioned, are the single most common type found, especially in tissue samples. So while there are a lot of microplastics getting into the environment, these ones are uniquely migrating into species of concern. Next slide, please. So where do these come from? Well, perhaps unsurprisingly, they are coming from our clothes. You all might be aware of this, but it is always impressive for me to remember that most folks don't appreciate that most of our clothes at this point are made out of plastic. So about 69, almost 70% of the materials we're used in the broader textile space are synthetic at this point. All of those synthetic clothes then can shed these tiny little microfibers during normal wash, wear, use, all of it. And laundry machines are a particularly known point source of pollution for this type of microplastic. So a single load of laundry can release up to 18 million microfibers just from a single load. Next slide, please. So fortunately, our washing machines don't just go straight out into the ocean. They go to a wastewater treatment plant. And there are some, depending on how your wastewater treatment plant is set up, some are more effective than others at capturing and remediating microfibers. So if you have a fine mesh screen, if you have tertiary treatment, you can often capture up to 90% or so of the microfibers. That still leaves about 10% getting out into aquatic environments. However, that 90% is typically caught in what we call the biosolids. And so these biosolids are kind of like the solid leftover part of our wastewater treatment plant. They go through this process that you can see down here at the bottom where they are dewatered. So you kind of press all the water out. And then they're used as like a fertilizer supplement, essentially. They are chock full of really valuable carbon and nitrogen and phosphorus that plants love. They use it on the side of roadways, as well as, in farms and forests. So really, wastewater treatment plants are an effective way to move microfibers from one place to the other rather than actually capture and remediate them. Next slide. This was a paper that came out recently from our colleagues over at Five Gyres, and they were looking at microfiber emissions into the air in addition to what we know comes out in the waterway from our washing machines. So this was looking at a single laundromat and the microfibers that are released by dryers into the air. And they found that a single laundromat can release up to 7.2 trillion microfibers every single year. So this is just, you can go to the next slide, kind of putting together all of these different numbers. They're really just, it's kind of hard to wrap your mind around, how much of our clothes are made out of plastics, the sheer volume of microfibers that have been released already. So you can see here 5.6 million metric tons of these microplastics have been released into the environment between 1950 and 2016. To put that into a more reasonable scale, we did some back of the envelope math, and that's equivalent to something like 26 billion t-shirts entering the environment. And so if you put all those microfibers back together into a t-shirt, 26 billion t-shirts worth of pollution entering the environment. And this is, not unique to the Pacific Northwest, but obviously we are focused here on the Pacific Northwest. 100% of rivers tested in Oregon had microfibers, and we've already shared our very scary 18 million microfibers from a single load of laundry. So what do? We have this point source problem. We think of a solution for that point source. Next slide, please. Fortunately, we do have some available technology that are ready to go in the form of microplastic filtration. So you can see here on this slide different versions of microfiber filters that are either ready or soon to be ready at scale. I will say that there are many, many more types than these that are on the market already. These microfiber filters have a mesh in them. The size can range a little bit depending on the technology, but they're usually like 100 microns or so. And at that level, they can capture 90% of these microfiber plastics. We've worked with some fantastic economic modelers in California, and they have determined that based on the cost of technology already, even without getting to the economies of scale, built-in fiber or built-in filters into a washing machine would cost less than $2 a year over the lifetime of a machine. And in addition to having the technology available, we know that these types of policies are broadly supported. So from some of the polling that Britta shared earlier with our social work or social survey work, 85% of folks responded, so they would be willing to pay more for a machine that captured microplastic fibers, and over 80% would support a mandate for these types of filters on new washing machines. So these are broadly supported issues here. Next slide. So really the most effective way to do this type of to go about requiring this is through policy. So we work on microfiber filtration policy. We have developed a whole host of tools to help other folks tackle these types of policies. So the first is a toolkit that we worked with Five Gyres and the Nature Conservancy on called Fibers to Filters. It has a brief overview of the science as well as a comprehensive review of past policy like bills, the current available technology, economic analysis. It's kind of got everything you would need if you want to go and do this in your state of interest. And then we also have model legislation. So the actual bill text you would need to require new washing machines to have these types of filters built in the future. We have harmonized definitions and standards that have been tested in other policies, as well as this idea of how you can phase these type of technology in over time so that it's not a shock to the system. Rather, you're ramping in this type of technology as we've seen done over, many examples with how we like update appliances and things. So that is all available. And if you go to the next slide, this is a QR code that will take you to our toolkit as well as our website for kind of all of our other plastics policy tools. And of course, our email addresses, because we are both more than willing and able to chat more about anything we talked about today.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much. We've got a couple of questions, if you don't mind, before we move on. There was a unit that you used in a previous slide. It was 7, 9, and 11. Can you go back and just clarify what those numbers were in reference to? It was earlier on.
Yes, and I can pull up the slide. Apologies. Those were a number of microplastics per individual razor clam or individual Pacific oyster. Great question. Units are clutch.
There is a septic question. What happens to homes on septics? Do they end up leaching from septic systems?
Ooh. Anya, you want to try? I think you're muted. Muted.
Team, it's 2026. How are we still doing this? I am so sorry.
Yeah, it's okay.
That is a great question. I am not familiar with any specific literature that's looked at like what comes out of septic systems. That being said, most of them are concrete lined and things like that. And like when you do clean out a microfiber filter at this point, and I saw that there's a question there on the lint traps and stuff, like what you're doing is you're basically like capturing that and like you should put it in the trash because the trash is going to go to an engineered landfill where at the very least those microplastics are contained. So I don't know. I did environmental engineering, but I worked on like wastewater treatment plants, not the septic side. So I don't know exactly what happens with those guys, but I think it's the same system of like if you have the proper engineering controls to make sure you're not leaking in the first place, you're probably in a little bit of a safer territory there.
And Dustin thought that it might be a combination of that it's caught in drain fields and then concentrated in the septage that is then pumped out into an OSS. So just a thought, who knows? We'll find out, to be determined. And then there was another question about are more fibers released from washing or from drying? And hang out, what if you hang your laundry on a line? Then you'll get arrested in some communities, but anyhow.
Gosh, that's a really good question. I think we're sort of we have a much better understanding of the washing cycle and emissions to aquatic environments than drying. That Five Gyres study was just from, gosh, a few months ago, Anya.
Yeah. Pretty recent.
Yeah, so we're just now starting to understand the relative emissions of both. So I think it's a little bit to be determined. They were looking at a commercial facility. We have yet to understand emissions from, individual residential facilities, et cetera. And I did also see a question about guppy bags. That's a really good question. There are definitely some in-wash interventions that have been tested previously. There's something called a Coraball that I think it was invented in Washington, perhaps. But but it kind of looks like a little octopus. It's made of plastic, but it has a bunch of little nubs, and it presumably captures microfibers. Ocean Conservancy was actually involved in a study working with the University of Toronto to test the coral ball, guppy bags, and the filters that Anya was talking about. They found that coral balls are about maybe 30% efficient at capturing fibers. Guppy bags, a little bit more so. I want to say it was more like 60% effective. You do have to clean them out, which is no big deal, but you have to wipe them out. And as Anya was mentioning, dispose of the fibers into a closed trash bin. But what we do know is far and away what's most effective at capturing microfibers are the filters. Those are 90% plus effective at capturing them. So truly, when we're thinking about solutions, that's the one that we tend to talk about with folks most.
Okay, thank you. And then
And to this,
oh, go ahead.
oh, sorry.
Anya,
I was
sorry.
gonna say to the point of like, hanging your wash on a line, like, yes, absolutely. Because we know that the main drivers really are just like the physical agitation, as well as like the amount of soaps and detergents you use in the washing machine. So if you want to take action today, and it will not be 90% effective, but it will be a little bit helpful, washing on cold, fewer rinse cycles or spinning cycles. I can't remember what that's called. Britta will have to remind me. And using less soap, like things like that all do kind of help limit a little bit of the microfiber release.
Okay, great. And then just one more question, and this is about the cleaning the filters, which would involve putting the fibers into the trash or landfills and rinsing them in the sink might be counterproductive. Oh, and there's one more after that too.
Yeah,
Yes,
I mean,
definitely.
Go ahead, Anya. Go.
Yes, you should not rinse them into the sink. And most of them come with pretty clear instructions on what to do. And our microfiber filter policy requires that like washing machines be labeled with instructions for what to do as well. You should put them in a trash. That goes to an engineered landfill. It's in a plastic bag typically, and then it goes to a concrete plus lined landfill. Is it the best case scenario? No. Is it better than letting those microplastics get out into the environment? Heck yes. So definitely like the best option we have available to us today.
Thank you. We have to move on at this point, but if you could answer Cassie Horton's question in the chat, that would be great. Thank you. Thank you both very much. That was very interesting and also very practical. So that's always good. And an inexpensive practical solution is always a good solution. Yeah. So thank you so much. And then there's another question from Eleanor Fanning too. So thank you. Okay. Well, thanks you two. And we're going to move on now to Anna Bachman from the Puget Sound Keeper Alliance. Welcome, Anna.
Hi there. Let me make this get going. I was just going to say that I hope everybody is, this is the time when food coma starts to set in from lunch. So hopefully you guys are okay with me. Can you see the actual presentation rather than my notes behind the scenes?
Yeah, and I don't know if it's just on my end, but there's kind of a little echo. Is anyone else hearing that? Like a little feedback?
I don't know about that.
Okay.
I can't turn my speaker off, otherwise you wouldn't hear me.
I hear a hum, but it's kind of, it's a low hum.
Okay. All right. So anyway, let me get going. As Heidi said, my name's Anna. I'm with Puget Sound Keeper Alliance. For those that you don't know, Puget Sound Keeper, we've been around since the 80s. The image that's behind my screen is actually from our 40th anniversary last year. We essentially are an organization that focuses on clean water, and we're part of this larger network, international network of water keepers across the globe called the Waterkeeper Alliance. In addition to my working for Puget Sound Keeper, I actually helped get the Waterkeeper in Iraq started. And I have a little thing to share from them at the very, very end. I'm going to kind of give you a little summary and a review of how our cleanup work exists as part of our plastic pollution response system. I'm going to talk a little bit about the role of how cleanups and data collection and community science, what role they can play and how that connects to our policy work. And kind of throughout this, I'll weave in the larger issue for us of awareness raising and public education. I have to, darn it, Patrick stole my thunder by putting this picture up of the Life magazine photo from 1955, the throwaway living. I might refer back to that as we go ahead. And in this workshop, we're going to, try and emphasize actionable interventions. And for Puget Soundkeeper, our stewardship activities, that's what we do. We operate at that level of intervention. We're at the capture and cleanup and at the monitoring, but also not on here, the public engagement. Removing, obviously plastic debris early prevents it from forming into and breaking down into microplastic contamination. And, so cleanups are kind of a strategy, a frontline mitigation tool in this work. Now, in the plastic life cycle, cleanups kind of address this fourth and fifth maybe the early stage 5. As I said, removing debris before fragmentation happens is critical to stop the formation of microplastics. Cleanups kind of complement whatever we can do upstream with plastic production, consumer use, or waste leakage, but cleanups is like the end of the pipe. And I took a look at our numbers for the past 8 years. Our marine debris program has conducted well over 1,000 cleanups, either on the water in kayaks or in boat-based cleanups or on the land. Just over 16,000 volunteers were involved in these cleanups over that period of time, contributing over 3,000 volunteer hours to the effort. And this resulted in that 8-year period, we removed about 45 tons of debris that was collected. And we try and do cleanups in lots of different ways with lots of different themes. We do sponsored cleanups with, businesses like Amazon and Expedia and Google. We do community-based cleanups. We provide equipment for others to have their own cleanups. We do the big, 5th of July. And this photo is actually from our trash or tree cleanups. So we're trying to, invigorate the cleanup idea with lots of different options and opportunities for people to get involved. And we're not alone. There are dozens, if not hundreds of groups, large and small, that are doing cleanups throughout Puget Sound and along the coast every month of the year. Many individuals that go out on a regular basis, to families and community groups, large-scale organizational efforts, as Patrick was talking about. There's lots of opportunities for people to get out there and do this work of debris removal from our land and our waters. I did want to actually mention a sort of a caveat to our debris program. In 2023, we started a project to focus on cleaning up what we call legacy debris, which is typically large debris that's been in our waterways for a very long time. So, for example, after surveying the upper Duwamish River here in Seattle, the part of the river that actually the big boats can't go up, we realized that there was debris that was dating back to the 70s or before, when the river was just treated as a dumping zone on a regular basis. And the cleanups we did in this area were probably some of the first ones that were done in this section of the river because of the logistical challenges. And we saw plenty of tires and lots of plastic debris as part of that debris cleanup. Given the size of the debris and the hazards we face, these were dumping sites, so there's a lot of broken glass. They're kind of likely the limit of what a nonprofit can accomplish. But we intend to keep doing cleanups in this area, and every summer there's no lack of legacy debris to remove out there. I also wanted to bring in something we don't do at Soundkeeper, but other groups, like many waterkeeper groups, do this, and that is trash trapping. Many groups that do this, they operate a trash trap or a boom or a skimmer program. Some of these are kind of short-lived activities, but for example, the Chattahoochee Riverkeeper is now in the 7th year of running trash traps in their watershed. And in large part, the main focus of these efforts is more about data collection. I mean, they definitely clean up a lot of debris, but it's really about the data that you can gain and that can help support public advocacy. And so, for example, this is an image of something they call the trash trout on Haw Creek in North Carolina. It's a program of Waterkeepers Carolina and another nonprofit in that area. And this photo is actually of a device that had to be rebuilt. The original was vandalized, which gets you into the problem with these types of devices. Sorry, I didn't know I had to click that, but I wanted to show you this slide, which, these devices are not inexpensive to build and to maintain, as I was mentioning about the Haw Creek one. There's the cost of maintenance, there's the permitting issues, hydrological conditions may not be optimal for them. Here in the Northwest, we get lots of woody debris that can just clog them right up. But they can provide some useful data. So for example, this is the data dashboard for Waterkeepers Carolina's trash trap program. This is looking at one of their trout trashes devices. And, it can get quite a bit of interesting data, but it also shows you, how often they have to clean it out. And they've been operating this at, I think, about 20 sites across North Carolina. So these can be useful devices to do, and they can generate a lot of good information. And now those of us that are in the cleaning world are very aware that, as I'm sure you are, that the plastic industry does not really want to emphasize upstream reduction. They want to focus on the cleanups and the recycling rather than any action that they might have to take. And I think Patrick also mentioned the Crying Indian public service announcement that was done by Keep America Beautiful back in the 50s. I remember that being a very powerful PSA. I don't know, Patrick said it seemed to increase trash, but I remember as a child when I saw it, it had a big effect on me. But this whole idea of framing the problem as a litter problem, a recycling problem, and encouraging groups, even funding groups to clean up, to do cleanups and shift the responsibility onto us as consumers and onto the municipalities. This is what we call in the research world, I guess, waste management framing. And this is something that in the cleanup world, we're very much aware of, like, we don't want to aid and abet that. But what I want to talk about in terms of, the cleanups have with them this incredible ability to raise awareness. And so while we recognize the need for an upstream solution, cleanups are going to remain a key component of our strategy because they are critical for raising awareness and creating that personal connection for people. In fact, environmental groups have a primary objective to raise awareness and educate the public about the threats of marine debris, and particularly plastic debris. So volunteers who participate in the cleanups often serve as advocates for upstream plastic reduction policies. They don't like cleaning it up again and again. We have volunteers who come back repeatedly to the same sites, and we're cleaning up the same stuff. And so it makes them great advocates. But the problem is microplastics are largely invisible. So education efforts really have to find a way to visualize the issue. We often, I think, at Soundkeeper, kind of pulling back and looking more at mesoplastics and macroplastics rather than microplastics. And we have to, like we were just talking, the folks from Ocean Conservancy were just talking about how just washing your laundry can generate all this microplastic. You need to make that visual connection to everyday activities and the impacts that they have. And connecting debris prevention to salmon recovery to public health. You remember that picture of the Life magazine photo at the very beginning, the throwaway living picture. I don't know if anybody ever watched it, but there was a drama series called Mad Men that was on like HBO or Netflix or one of the streaming programs. And whether you watched it or not, you can go to YouTube and you can Google Mad Men picnic scene. And it was a scene of the family, that's the main characters, husband and wife and their 2 kids going out to a public park to picnic. And at the end of the picnic, the husband gets up, he drinks the last of his beer, crushes his can, and throws it across into the bushes. His wife stands up, she shakes out the picnic blanket with all the debris, wraps it up, and they all jump in the car and take off, leaving all this trash behind. And I remember watching that when I first saw that scene and how it like had this visceral reaction. So it's shocking to us today sometimes to see this, and that really is a sign that public awareness has shifted. I did want to just do a shout out that we do have a hotline at Puget Sound Keeper. We're only getting about 40 to 60 calls each year on a variety of different topics. We're not a hotline, we're more like a tip line. The vast majority of our calls are about fuel and oil spills, but marine debris and waste calls are right behind that. And for us, each call is an opportunity to help inform the public, to help them identify what they're seeing, to understand the threats, and to find local resources. Now, I also wanted to just touch base on the issue of community science and the role of marine debris cleanups in that world. Cleanups are not only an opportunity to remove, they can potentially, if they're done right, generate valuable environmental data sets. These are some examples of different protocols, some that we've done, some that others do. We do the Escape Trash Assessment Protocol, or ETAP surveys, every spring at Golden Gardens, a park in Seattle, in collaboration with Zero Waste Washington. We assist as a regional coordinator for the International Coastal Cleanup, which does a lot of data collection. There's also the NOAA Marine Debris Shoreline Survey. There's a very, very cool, simple survey on pre-production plastic called Nerdle Patrol that's international. Takes like 10 minutes to do, super easy to incorporate. We often do brand audits, trash audits as well, to identify, what specific items are showing up in the debris. So volunteers can dramatically expand sort of the spatial coverage of monitoring and science across Puget Sound shorelines if we do it right. Feedback loops between the community action, the community science, and the regulatory form can really help, assist in developing policy, and it does a tremendous amount to educate the public. But and data collected by the volunteers, helps us figure out where the trash is coming from, how it's moving through the watershed. It can build awareness, as I said, public awareness and public ownership of a water quality issue. But it has its drawbacks. As these are just some of the basic problems that you might have with community science. It's valuable, but it needs to be methodologically rigorous. It might only be sort of screening level data rather than regulatory grade data. It will require strong quality assurance, quality control frameworks, often in partnership with labs or university or agency partners. Designing community science to pair volunteer sampling with expert validation may often work better. And transparency is very important for developing credibility. And I'll give you one example. In our experience, in 2023, we got some funding to organize what we call the Puget Sound, very hopefully called the Puget Sound Microplastic Community Science Initiative. And we trained 5 different groups all around Puget Sound in the EPA's Beach Sediment Protocol, which is pictured here on this slide. And as I said before, community science is valuable, but it needs to be rigorous. And the educational value of a community science initiative is, for many environmental organizations like ourselves, the point of these initiatives rather than the quality of the data collection effort. I mean, I have done lots of community science, things I've called community science efforts, and never done anything with the data because the data quality is not strong enough. And the thing is, poor data also can have poor educational value. And our experience in this particular initiative was that it was so difficult to diligently locate microplastics within our samples because the methodology or the implementation of methodology with volunteers was not rigorous enough, not strong enough. And it can lead you to believe that there are no microplastics in your sample, and the volunteers walk away thinking, microplastics, not such a big concern. So if community science initiatives are going to work, this has to be addressed. And of course, community science initiatives require a pretty big lift. The more involved the methodology is, the more time it takes to train and to do the protocol. These efforts may not last much more than a year or two. And I actually contacted all these groups right before this presentation to see who's still doing the protocol, and most of them are not. Lack of staffing, lack of funding. And also the issues that they had thinking that the protocol wasn't robust enough. So with all these drawbacks, there's just no one-size-fits-all solution. I pulled this quote out of a journal article from this past year that was evaluating different community science initiatives around cleanups for microplastic and how identifying microplastic in samples. And the key factors, though, that this quote talks about is that there's a tremendous need by the public to participate in ecological research. They want to do this, and they want to collect real data. And the second part of it is that, government-led or, organizationally led community science activities or science activities are challenging to do. And you could essentially really expand your knowledge if you can figure out a way to engage the community in that science that you do. So here's some kind of the strategies, the steps for, how your science might better inform the work that you do. And I kind of want to end on this note about policy and connecting data to regulation. Community science and cleanup data, could really be used more to influence, upstream prevention. In our law and policy program, we were involved in the recent efforts to get the plastic bag ban passed and the bottle bill passed. And, it's simple questions. Gail, our policy and advocacy managers, just asked us, how many plastic bags did you pick up in the International Coastal Cleanup last year? These are simple little bits of data that we can pull from our community science, but also lots of great stories that come out of the community science work that can inform the upstream problems. I'm going to end with just 2 slides. I looking at the metrics, we're in my organization where we do cleanups all the time. We're averaging only about, I think we remove about 11,000 pounds of debris each year. That's around 5 tons of debris every year. And while it can be kind of difficult to quantify how much debris is actually entering Puget Sound, this Washington State Department of Ecology's litter study can give us a kind of a rough estimate of what might be entering the sound. I mean, there's this, I think Patrick said it's around 38 million pounds of debris is estimated to be entering the environment every year. And if you consider that, Puget Sound makes up, 20% of the state, and yet most of the urban areas and most of the population are in Puget Sound, I've kind of calculated roughly that we're seeing about 20 to 27 million pounds of debris going into Puget Sound every year. And we are, even if you times Puget Soundkeeper by 200 groups at the community level, we're only tackling a very small percentage of the problem. It's super cool to hear that at the agency level, they're getting out, a lot more, but the two of us together, we're not getting, we're not reaching the 50% mark even. So it's clear that we're not going to be able to catch up to the amount of plastic that's entering our waters every year without the state taking action, without these upstream solutions. But I just want to say that cleanups are a part of that because they build support for that upstream action, if nothing else. So I will end there with a cleanup limerick that I just wanted to hopefully jazz you, get your juices flowing after lunch. There's my contact. And after I stop the presentation, you can read that for yourself, but after I stop the presentation, I'm going to copy into the chat a YouTube link for a video created by the Iraq Waterkeeper as a public service kind of announcement that he uses in his area to encourage people to change their attitudes towards trash. It's called Before Human Touch, After Human Touch, and I'll put that in the chat. So I will leave it there, and thank you.
Well, thank you, Anna. That was very interesting. We have time for just a couple of questions. There was a question about whether we have trash traps in Washington. Do we have them?
Well, we do not do it at Soundkeeper, and in my quick review, I tried to locate some, but I don't believe that there are any. I think it may be more difficult to do it in Washington State. I think you have to have pretty, I'm not an expert on this at all, but having a, understanding the hydrology of where you're going to place it, being able to handle all the woody debris that we might get, dealing with high water flows and low water flows, it's challenging. And there's probably going to be permitting requirements, but it would be something that we would love to try.
Okay. Well, we'll have to follow up because that sounds like it might be an interesting idea. And then another question about whether there's a good curriculum for high school science classes that would produce useful and quality data.
Well, this is what we're struggling with because we use our microplastic sediment and we have a grab sample protocol as well for microplastics, and we do it every year with the Maritime High School students with their 9th grade program. And I'm still not happy with these protocols. Curriculum is a different issue. I am not an educator, I'm not a high school educator, but we do, even though my staff, we do a lot of education. We've sort of often developed our own curriculums and adapted others, and it's sort of a piecemeal system in my opinion. There's a lot out there, but there's a lot of stuff you have to shift through to get something that might be appropriate.
Okay, thank you, Anna. All right,
Sharon.
Thank you so much. We're going to move on now to Heather Church. Heather.
Real quick, though, Heidi, Bob did come off camera. I just wanted to check
Bob,
and
I'm
see
sorry.
if there
Oh,
was
it almost looked like it was
question.
just his photograph.
It does.
Yeah, make it. We have to make it quick though, because we don't want to shortcut Heather.
Okay. Thank you, Anna. That was great. I also do like adopt a spot, here in Kitsap County and pick up trash around Illinois State Park area where I live. One thing I've noticed is that when you go out and pick up the trash, picking it up, people, wave to you. They're happy to see you out there. Also, I have this kind of theory that if a place is dirty and covered with trash, nobody thinks twice about throwing out their coffee cups or booze bottles or whatever. But if it's clean, then they're not so, I've noticed, when I first started a couple years ago, I would pick up, 3 to 6 bags of trash, and now covering the same area, I only get like 1. So I think it does make a difference if you care about an area, to pick up the trash, and then people aren't so, I don't know, slobby, I guess. I don't know if you have the same.
I have seen one of the things I've noticed also is that if there's a lot of public access and the public can get, walk on a trail through an area, whereas if it's less formal and you have to sort of bushwhack your way, or there's, it's not designed for humans to walk through an area, I always find that the former is cleaner than the latter. It's sort of like if it's getting attention, if people are seeing it, like, I mean, I know that when I walk down a trail, if I see trash, if I see it, I often pick it up. So you get a lot of that happening because people are on the trail. But if you don't, it's sort of sight out of scene, the trash can get much worse.
Thank you. Okay,
Thanks.
we're going to close out questions now. Heather, please join us. Thank you.
In my screen and hearing me all right? Perfect. I'm back. Okay, well, we're going to bounce back and talk a little bit more about some policy. Luckily, my colleague Patrick Minster earlier today covered quite a bit of this as well. So there'll just be a little bit more in-depth detail in some of what I would share.
Heather, you're a little bit garbled. Could you adjust your audio just maybe a touch? Sorry.
I can certainly try. Can you hear me better with this one? Maybe not.
It's okay. Go ahead. Maybe if you just get closer, I don't.
No, Heather, that second time was better, I think. It was like there was some like it sounds like something was hitting your microphone or something, like your clothes maybe.
Okay, well, my microphone is beneath me. I'm not sure how I can
It
get
sounds
through
great now. Yeah, it sounds good now.
Great. I'll just make sure I project my voice the best I can. Thank you. Hello, good afternoon. My name is Heather Church, she, her pronouns. I'm a waste reduction and recycling specialist with the Department of Ecology, and I'm here to share some information on the Department of Ecology's solid waste management program's single-use product restriction laws. Today, I'll cover 5 laws from the Revised Code of Washington, RCW 70A530, 70A455, and specific sections of RCW 70A245. It's a lot of mumbo jumbo, but for us, that's what guides our work. The implementation of these laws span from 2021 to 2028 to ultimately reduce problematic materials, most of which are plastic. Notably, single-use plastic bags, unwanted serviceware items, expanded polystyrene packaging, food and overwater products, and lastly, mini toiletries in plastic packaging. Like Patrick covered in his presentation, while we can say that these laws reduce sources of problematic plastics in Washington, we don't know if restricting these products has a direct impact on microplastics in the environment. Currently, ecology doesn't study microplastics or these products' contributions to microplastics in the environment. However, results from Ecology's 2022 litter study, like we've mentioned in several presentations today, can provide useful baselines for evaluation of how these policies impact the amount, composition, and distribution of litter throughout Washington. These are estimated in annual accumulation levels for several banned single-use items. As you can see here on the slide, single-use plastic carryout bags accumulate in about 18.7 million pieces each year, which is 127,279 pounds. Plastic food serviceware, often single-use, accumulates at 38,412 pounds or 9.7 million pieces each year. And EPS, expanded polystyrene, food service products accumulate at 11,053 pounds or 1 million pieces each year. Keep in mind as well as when you're looking at the pounds of this, these are often very lightweight materials, so it's an awful lot of material. While this is a narrow snapshot of problematic plastics getting into Washington's environments, it does show that these products have a presence in Washington's litter composition, where they're exposed to elements and then can break down. After my presentation, I'll pop that litter study link directly into the chat so folks can read that. And again, this was from 2022. To start our discussion, we'll cover the single-use plastic bag ban, which came into play in October of 2021 after a delay due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Single-use plastic bags, or the 0.5 mil thickness bags, are banned from use and distribution to customers from retail businesses through food banks, or though food banks are still allowed to use them. We also have a few other exemptions for bags throughout the state. The law allows paper carryout bags and reusable plastic carryout bags, which must be both made of 40% recycled content, and plastic film bags must also be 2.25 mil thick and reusable up to 125 times and labeled with these standards and the words reusable. Paper bags require a minimum of 8-cent fee, and plastic bags are now required to have a minimum of 12-cent fee, which is then taxed as retail sale and retained by the retailer. Customers using food benefits like EBT, SNAP, tribal voucher, or other assistance programs to purchase these items are exempt from those minimum fees. This is, I'm sure, for most folks, been our most publicly visible ban that we've had on single-use plastics. Something to note is that the ban really only applies to single-use carry-out bags at the point of sale. It does not apply to produce bags or small bags used in store for bulk items, newspaper or dry cleaning bags, trash bags or pet waste bags sold in store, or small film bags used to wrap items in a deli setting or for safety and sanitary purposes. Part of the single-use plastic bag ban required a report to the legislature to allow an opportunity for the legislature to amend the mill thickness and for the reusable carryout bags made of plastic film. The amount of the pass-through charge for the bags as well, or to make other needed revisions to the chapter during our most recent legislative session. While this report contains some insights on the bag ban, especially from studies and bag ban policies from other states, it also illuminated a lot of data gaps, which limit our ability to understand the impacts of this policy in Washington. It turns out that it's surprisingly complicated to quantify the total number of plastic bags used by customers across the state. The report findings were based on data from one distributor covering from 2021 to 2022. Retail scanner data could not provide bag sales or information on bag sales because the product is not scanned at checkout, and the data from Washington Department of Revenue on bag sales deductions did not come from enough retailers to provide insight into total bag sales. Additionally, plastic bag distributors declined to share data on bag sales, and Department of Ecology did not have authority to require that information. To understand the impact of the law and to inform policy solutions moving forward, more information is needed. Information like further assessment and sharing of data from distributors and retail stores, total quantities of plastic film and carry-out bags distributed in Washington state before and after the bag ban effective date, ideally over the course of multiple years, the cost of plastic film and paper carry-out bags to retail stores, including the comparison of large chain stores and independent small retailers and grocers, impact of plastic bag thickness on consumer behavior and perception of bag value and reusability, Washington consumer behavior regarding disposal and reuse of plastic film bags, paper bags, and durable fabric bags, and of course, customer price sensitivity to the various bag fees. From the report that we just discussed, the one data that we do have that is kind of illuminating came from one distributor, again, between 2021 and 2022, that showed that in Washington, we saw a decrease in the quantity of bags distributed and an increase in the total plastic used following the implementation of the ban. Based on sales data, the number of bags fell by 50% between that year, 2021 and 2022. However, during that same time, total plastic use by weight increased by 17%. The increase in plastic weight is a result of the fact that these bags are about 4 times heavier than their single-use counterparts. Regardless of the data we do or don't have for Washington, it's widely known that without sufficient reuse, reusable carryout bags made of paper, plastic, or fabric have environmental life cycle costs that are far greater than their single-use counterparts. That's why Ecology's developed flyers, education, and outreach to promote customers reusing their existing bags through a bring your own bag messaging. For anyone who's interested, we do have social media, flyers, and other things that you all we would love for you to share and distribute on this. So let me know if you would like that information. Next along our timeline is the Single-Use Serviceware Law, which was implemented in 2022. The requirements of this law are pretty simple. Rather than automatically providing customers or patrons with single-use food serviceware items, businesses have one of three choices. Businesses can ask the customer if they want the items and have the customer confirm. A customer can request these items, or the business can set up a self-serve station. This law applies to nearly all food service providers, including temporary vendors like food trucks or farmers markets, cafeterias like schools or other institutions. Businesses are allowed to offer reusable items, and wherever possible, we encourage the switch to reusable or durable items as a more sustainable option that can reduce waste if it's used on a long-term scale. For this law, food serviceware items are, as shown, utensils, forks, knives, spoons, and chopsticks, drink stirrers, straws, splash sticks, and cocktail picks, cold beverage cup lids, and sauce or condiment packets, sachets, and containers. There are exemptions under this law for certain items, and for those of you who want to know what that looks like, please ask in the Q&A or let me know in the chat. We'd be happy to share that information with you. But to keep things rolling, we're just going to keep going. And finally, the only part of this law that is an actual ban is on bundled single-use items. This, again, is with the intent to not automatically provide customers with items that they don't want or need. So if a customer just wants a fork, they aren't also then provided the spoon, knife, napkin, salt and pepper pack. Okay, this one's one of my favorites. But before we really get into the details, I'm going to use the term expanded polystyrene a lot. Quite a few of you already know what that is, but I want to make sure that we're all on the same page. Expanded polystyrene, or sometimes referred to as the acronym EPS, is a lightweight material that's made from polystyrene beads, which are beads made of a specific type of plastic, polystyrene, are expanded during the processing and placed into molds to create products that are excellent at holding a rigid shape and providing thermal insulation or protecting fragile items. This material is typically seen in packaging materials, food service items, or building and construction. Some of you may know or call this material styrofoam, but the correct term is expanded polystyrene, or EPS foam. Styrofoam is technically a trademark term used for specific manufactured extruded polystyrene, often used in insulation boards for walls, roofs, moisture barriers, and craft projects. And Department of Ecology received you might consider it a lightweight cease and desist from ever calling this styrofoam, because that is not this product's name. EPS materials are extremely brittle and break easily into tiny pieces. These small pieces scatter in the wind and contaminate our environment, which is what makes them so problematic. So the expanded polystyrene ban, or EPS ban, prohibits manufacturers, producers, and distributors from selling and distributing certain expanded polystyrene materials into and within Washington state. This includes foam coolers, plates, bowls, to-go clamshell containers, trays, cups, and packaging peanuts. Any businesses that sold or used these items in Washington have been impacted by this law. Businesses that sell shipping or packaging materials, retail establishments that sell these products, such as grocers, convenience stores, gas stations, and others like that. Restaurants and food service establishments cannot use EPS foam to-go containers or cups or plates. Institutional cafeterias, such as schools, hospitals, or correctional facilities, cannot use these materials, and as well as nonprofits, religious organizations, or even individual consumers. So pretty much everyone who purchased and used these materials can no longer do so and should not be able to find these items for sale within or into Washington state. There are quite a few exceptions, and again, if you have questions, let me know. I'd be happy to dig into the details of these laws, but again, we're just kind of keeping the high level detail in this presentation. Next, and talking about a pretty similar material type, is the foam docks and blocks law. Implemented in January of 2024, this law requires foam used in dock construction to be fully enclosed to prevent it from breaking down and littering the environment. polystyrene foam used to repair current overwater structures and float new overwater structures must be fully enclosed in concrete, aluminum, steel, or durable plastic that's at least 0.15 inches thick. There's a few important exemptions for this law. Again, feel free to ask a question. Overall, the foam docks and blocks law really just formalizes current and common dock overwater structure building practices and affects, compared to the other laws, a very small fraction of Washington's. As my colleague Patrick Mercer mentioned earlier today, in 2024, the Plastics Product Degradability Act, it's very Patrick, I always stumble on this one, took effect. This law created labeling standards for compostable products, including the requirements for them to be certified by a third party who has verified that the product performs and breaks down as advertised. The law makes compostable items more clearly stand out from other single-use items with the color signal, the certification logo, and the written word compostable. Ultimately, this law helps reduce greenwashing terminology, consumer confusion, and plastic contamination or pollution into compost and finally, our last law to discuss is the mini toiletries and lodgings law. Beginning in 2027, so starting next year, lodging establishments like hotels, motels, resorts, bed and breakfast, inns, timeshare properties, short-term rentals, vacation homes, anything that's short-term rentals, may not automatically provide customers with mini toiletries in rented units or in public restrooms. Many toiletries under this law are personal care or beauty products that are less than 6 ounces in plastic packaging. So, tiny and in plastic packaging. That also includes packaging that is plastic plus another material type. So, metal foil pouches, a cardboard box that has a plastic window in it, anything like that is still banned. At least from being automatically provided. And then the personal health and beauty products that are covered under this law are shampoo, conditioner, body wash and shower gel, soap, liquid or bar, lotion, and hand sanitizer. This does not include items like shower caps, toothbrushes, cotton swabs, makeup remover cloths, or anything outside the list I just mentioned. This law is similar to the single-use serviceware law in that it essentially is an on-request type of law, where the affected establishments cannot automatically provide these materials to guests. However, guests can still ask for them. They just can't be there automatically for a guest. Ecology also encourages lodging establishments to update guest rooms with reusable containers that can be refilled with personal care products. This is the most environmentally friendly preferred alternative and would save costs for businesses, and of course, would save on small plastic waste. While these laws help to restrict unwanted and problematic plastics in Washington, there are several barriers that exist which keep us from seeing the full potential and impacts of these laws. First, Ecology has limited authority on manufacturer and distributor sales for most of the laws. The EPS ban and the Plastic Product Degradability Act, I'm so sorry, it must be leprechauns today, are the only laws that grant Ecology direct authority to restrict sales and distribution on products in and into Washington. The other laws we've discussed, like single-use bag ban, serviceware, all of them, still allow businesses to purchase these materials, and distributors are allowed to sell them, but it's up to the businesses themselves to understand the laws, know the laws, and only purchase the correct materials. This has caused a pretty large confusion, and for businesses that are experiencing tight times, it can be very difficult to understand and sometimes keep in mind which bags am I allowed to buy and why, when one is sometimes 4 times more expensive but is legal than the other that they're still going to, ship to me. Makes it a lot. This brings me to our second barrier. Outreach about these laws has limitations and affects our compliance. While we work through major channels of communication to reach as many affected businesses as possible, some are still not receiving the information about our laws. For instance, non-English speaking businesses have received limited communications. This could be because most of our communications have been in English, or because the majority of our outreach strategies use English speaking news channels, trade associations, and we have limited funding and established communication channels and partnerships with non-English speaking trade associations or community-based organizations to get them the information. Ecology has strived to correct this through mass mailings with translations into 18 different languages, and also features picture-focused flyers for businesses. We've sent this to businesses directly in the mail via the business's NAICS codes for those who would likely be affected by these laws. However, these efforts are expensive, and in our current time, it makes it a bit more challenging. And also the success of those mailings is very difficult to measure. Additionally, regardless of language spoken at the business, there is still existing confusion about law details that shows continued non-compliance. Next, enforcement is reliant upon customer and public reporting, which is designated to us in statute for each of these laws. This requires customers or members of the public to report to the Department of Ecology when they see a business out of compliance with one of our laws. And in order for Ecology to take enforcement action, we have to receive that report from them. This process has some cost savings and staff savings. However, it also forces Ecology to depend on the public's knowledge of the laws to report accurately, frequently, and puts burden on them to inform us of how the law is being complied with. This process gives us only a fairly small window into the larger picture of compliance and begs questions like, are affected businesses in compliance and that's why we're not receiving reports? Or does the public need more information to continue reporting cases of non-compliance? Or, and this one I think is becoming more common, is the process of reporting too burdensome and we aren't receiving reports because it's not easy, important, or relevant to Washingtonians as compared to more pressing current events. And lastly, Ecology has limited data, authority, and funding to study the effects of these laws. As we discussed earlier in the presentation, in the Baghdance reports to the legislature, Ecology has identified data and knowledge gaps regarding these laws. We do not have data or knowledge on the total amount of restricted materials in Washington, whether by retailers or from distributors, and how this has changed since the implementation of each law, how the laws affect consumer choices, disposal and reuse of materials, and so forth. Funding to study these effects is also not available as the limited funding we do have to implement the laws must be spent on outreach and communications. The limited knowledge also highlights that we solely rely on external studies to correlate this work with possible effects on microplastic pollution. However, with barriers comes opportunities. Yay. And so through creative outreach and education strategies, we can bridge gaps in our outreach efforts and bring more businesses and into compliance through education rather than enforcement, and continue to educate our residents and those within Washington. We are working to build and foster relationships to better connect those who need to hear these messages. Washington is a large and expansive state. It's everyone's interest that we strengthen connections and extend the reach to better serve our residents and businesses. And by continuing to learn from groups such as this, we strive to build knowledge about our work and learn from you all. Microplastic pollution is a difficult and complex issue. Like many environmental issues, it'll take a holistic and big picture framing to understand the mechanisms driving the issue and how to best address solutions. I hope to continue to learn from this group and want to thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Heather. Very interesting, slightly depressing, but interesting. So there are just a couple of questions before we move into our breakouts. So Anna said that they've seen concrete encapsulated docks break apart and release foam, so encapsulation may not last. Is there any plan to require foam-free flotation systems, period?
Great question. At this time, the law does not give ecology any sort of authority to expand that law and to require all new dock systems to not be made with EPS. Something that we often encourage individuals, especially those that have concerns, is reach out to your representatives and let them know upcoming legislative sessions. That's when the legislature has time to go back and amend laws. Ecology as a cabinet agency really has no authority to go in and amend any of these laws. It would have to go back through the legislative session.
Right.
Start putting that information into their hands. If we start speaking up about those concerns, it can get on their radar and things can change.
Yes. So it's kind of on us. Okay, thank you. And then finally, how have responses or attitudes of businesses changed over time of some of these laws have been put into place longer, like over a long period of time? Like the plastic bag ban's been around for a while. Do you see any businesses going, hey, this is great, you know?
No, that's not true. I'd say that it's challenging. I think what really seems to work well for businesses, and especially the implementation and education to businesses about these laws, is when they don't have like these different rollout periods, right, where things are continuously changing, where they have to increase fees, where they have to then go to from a 2.25 mil bag to a 4 mil bag to something thicker. Businesses have a lot of confusion about that already. They're distracted and this isn't their priority. So as simple as these laws can be, the better. It's the same with the public. Anytime, especially with our recent fee change for plastic bags, went from 8 cents to 12 cents. That flags for a lot of people, especially in times that are economically challenging. When laws are stagnant, it's a one-time implementation like the EPS ban. Folks typically get that, they understand. And once they know that, they can adapt. It's always challenging. It's a cost and a burden to these businesses, but they'll adopt and change, and they'll make that work. It's when the laws continue to evolve and change that gets really complicated. Compliance gets challenging, and also we have limited bandwidth to get their attention to say, no, now this is what you need to do.
Yeah.
So I hope that answers the question.
It does. Yeah. It's a complicated question to be continued for sure. Thank you, Heather. That was great.